Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash and Serena got married in Kalos. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Echo of a Vow. The roar was a physical thing, a wave of sound and pressure that washed over the stadium floor, vibrating through the soles of Ash Ketchum's boots. It was the collective voice of 100,000 people, a tidal surge of excitement that could drown a lesser man. But for Ash, it was just background noise, a familiar hum that faded into the sharp, electric focus of the battlefield. Across from him, Mega Gardevoir hovered like a spectral queen, its elegant white dress billowing not from any wind, but from the sheer psychic force it commanded. Its crimson eyes were fixed on Pikachu, who stood before Ash, cheeks sparking with a low, dangerous crackle. This was the final exchange of what had been a brutal, beautiful dance of power and strategy. "You've grown, Ash," Diantha's voice called out, calm and clear despite the stadium's deafening chorus. Her own expression was one of intense concentration, a faint sheen of sweat on her brow betraying the effort it took to keep pace with him. "You and your Pokémon fight with a clarity I've rarely seen." It was true. The years since he'd last competed in the Kalos League had forged him. The wild, unpredictable talent was still there, the fiery core of his spirit that refused to be extinguished. But it was tempered now, honed by countless battles, by victories and humbling defeats across regions he'd once only read about. He no longer relied on sheer tenacity to break through an opponent's guard. He saw the patterns, the tells, the subtle shifts in balance. He saw the entire battle laid out like a map. "We had to," Ash replied, his voice level, his gaze never leaving Gardevoir. "You don't get to stand against a champion by staying the same." He shared a look with Pikachu, a silent conversation passing between them in a fraction of a second. "Pressure the left. Feint high, then go low. Draw out Moonblast." Pikachu's tail twitched in acknowledgement. "Gardevoir, the stage is yours." Dazzling Gleam. Diantha commanded, a final, grand gesture. Gardevoir raised its arms, and the air itself seemed to fracture into 1,000 points of blinding, kaleidoscopic light. The attack erupted outward, a dome of punishing fairy energy designed to overwhelm, to leave no room for escape. It was a champion's move. Overpowering, absolute. The Ash of years ago would have ordered a head-on charge, trying to match power with power. The Ash of today saw the opening. "Pikachu, use Iron Tail on the field." Ash commanded, his voice cutting through the flare. Pikachu's tail hardened into a silver blade, and he didn't leap at Gardevoir. Instead, he spun, slamming his tail into the pristine battlefield turf. A slab of earth and stone, 6 feet wide, erupted upward, flung into the path of the dazzling gleam. The light shattered against the makeshift shield, casting a chaotic spray of rainbows and shadows across the arena. For a split second, Gardevoir's vision was obscured. That was all they needed. Now. Volt Tackle. Bursting from behind the falling debris, Pikachu became a comet of pure electricity. He shot forward, a golden blur that hugged the ground, using the lingering shadows for cover. He wasn't aiming for Gardevoir's center mass. He was aiming for the space just beneath its levitating form, the point where its psychic energy was most focused on maintaining its flight. Diantha's eyes widened. She saw the trajectory too late. Gardevoir, teleport. But Pikachu was already there. The Volt Tackle didn't strike Gardevoir directly. Instead, Pikachu redirected his momentum at the last possible moment, his body arcing. The electrical charge didn't hit Gardevoir, it discharged into the air around it, a massive, uncontrolled burst of raw power that shorted out the delicate psychic energies holding the Pokémon aloft. Mega Gardevoir faltered, its form flickering as it dropped a few feet, its elegant float disrupted. The landing was clumsy, a stumble that broke its regal posture. The vulnerability lasted no more than a second, but a second was an eternity. Thunderbolt, Ash said, his voice almost quiet. Pikachu, having landed perfectly from his arc, unleashed the attack. There was no charge up, no dramatic cry. Just a devastating, precise bolt of lightning that struck Gardevoir dead center. The champion's Pokémon cried out, its body seizing before it collapsed, the brilliant light of its Mega Evolution receding, leaving a fainted Gardevoir in its place. Silence. For a full 5 seconds, the stadium held its breath. The roar had vanished, replaced by a collective, disbelieving quiet. Then, it returned, tenfold. A sound so immense, so explosive, it felt like the sky itself was tearing open. The referee's flag went up, a formality no one was watching. Ash let out a slow breath, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He walked forward, kneeling as Pikachu scampered up his arm, nuzzling his cheek. "You were incredible, buddy," he whispered, the words lost in the gale of cheers. "Pikachu," came the tired but triumphant reply. Across the field, Diantha was recalling her Gardevoir, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. She applauded, a graceful, deliberate gesture that cut through the noise. She had been defeated, but she looked impressed. Thrilled, even. In the stands, in a private box reserved for Kalos royalty, Serena watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding a rhythm that matched the frantic energy of the crowd. Her fingers were laced together so tightly her knuckles were white. She hadn't just been watching a battle, she'd been living it. She saw every feint, every strategy, every ounce of trust Ash placed in his Pokémon. She saw the man he had become. The decisive leader, the brilliant strategist, the unwavering core of strength. The sight of him, standing there in the center of the world's attention, so calm and so powerful, sent a thrill through her that had nothing to do with the victory itself. It was pride, pure and overwhelming. He did it, she breathed, a wide, luminous smile breaking across her face. Her Pancham and Sylveon, perched on the seat beside her, cheered along with her. She'd become a champion in her own right. The crown of the Kalos Queen sat not on her head, but in the hearts of millions. Her performances were legendary, broadcast globally. She brought light, hope, and an infectious joy to a world that often felt starved of it. She was confident, she was celebrated, she was fulfilled. But a part of her, a quiet, essential part, had always been tied to the boy with the Pikachu on his shoulder. And seeing him now, not as a boy, but as the man who had realized every ounce of his boundless potential, made that connection feel stronger than ever. The ceremony was a blur of flashing cameras, official handshakes, and the presentation of a commemorative trophy. Ash was gracious, shaking Diantha's hand firmly. "A battle for the ages, Ash." "Truly," the champion said, her grip firm. "Kalos is honored to have witnessed it." "The honor was all mine, Diantha," Ash replied, and he meant it. As the officials guided him toward the exit tunnel, he navigated the throng of reporters and league staff with a practiced ease. But his eyes were scanning the stands, searching for one face in a sea of thousands. He found her. She was standing in her box, her hand raised in a small, private wave. Their eyes met across the vast expanse, and for a moment, the roaring stadium, the flashing lights, all of it melted away. There was only her smile, a beacon that had guided him more times than he could count. He gave a slight nod, a silent promise. Later. Then, the world went cold. It wasn't a drop in temperature. It was a plunge into nothingness. The roar of the crowd didn't just quiet, it was erased, as if a giant hand had smothered the very concept of sound. The vibrant colors of the stadium, the banners, the lights, the cheering fans, seemed to gray out, desaturated and lifeless. A wave of profound, soul-crushing despair washed over the stadium, so potent that people stumbled, clutching their heads. Ash felt it like a physical blow. A hollow, sucking void that tried to pull the warmth from his chest. Pikachu shrieked on his shoulder, for standing on end, his red cheeks sparking erratically. "What, what is this? Diantha stammered, her hand flying to her temple. Then, from the public concourse just beyond the tunnel entrance, came a scream. Not of excitement, but of pure terror. It was followed by a crash, the sound of metal twisting and shattering. Ash didn't hesitate. Pikachu, stay with me, he yelled, breaking into a run, pushing past the stunned officials and into the tunnel. He burst out into the main concourse to a scene of chaos. People were scrambling away from the stadium's central plaza, their faces pale with fear. In the center of the plaza stood a Pangoro. It should have been a common sight, a Pokémon probably belonging to a fan. But this was wrong. Utterly wrong. Its eyes were vacant, milky white voids devoid of any light or emotion. Its body was surrounded by a faint, shimmering distortion, a haze of gray energy that seemed to drink the light from the air. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, its head twitching from side to side. It wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was empty. A puppet with its strings cut. It raised a thick bamboo stalk and swung it with mindless force, smashing a vendor cart to splinters. Everyone, get back. Ash roared, his voice cutting through the panic. A pair of stadium security guards and their Mac Hoke partners moved to intercept. Mac Hoke, low sweep, one of them commanded. The two fighting-type Pokémon charged, but as they entered the gray haze surrounding the Pangoro, they visibly slowed, their movements becoming sluggish as if wading through thick tar. The Pangoro didn't even seem to register their approach. It simply swung its bamboo stalk again, a clumsy, brutal arc that connected with one of the Mac Hoke, sending it flying into a wall with a sickening thud. The other Mac Hoke faltered, its fighting spirit seeming to evaporate on the spot. This was the feeling. The cold, hollow wrongness he had sensed at the edges of the world for months. On remote islands, in dense forests, he'd felt these fleeting cold spots, these pockets of utter silence where life should have been. Now, here it was, raw and manifest, in the heart of Lumio City. The Pangoro turned its vacant gaze toward a small girl who had tripped and fallen, her face a mask of terror. It started to lumber towards her. No! Ash yelled. He didn't think. He acted. He thrust his hands forward, focusing his will, his very life force, into a single point. A brilliant, sapphire blue light erupted from his palms, forming a shimmering barrier of energy between the Pangoro and the child. It wasn't the wild, uncontrolled burst of his youth. This was a shield, solid and defined, humming with a power that was the polar opposite of the Pangoro's emptiness. It was pure, vibrant life. The Pangoro's bamboo stalk slammed into the aura shield. The impact was silent, the gray, dead energy of its attack dissolving against the living blue light. The creature recoiled, not in pain, but in confusion, as if it had just struck a concept it could not comprehend. The effort sent a jolt through Ash, a familiar drain that was sharper, more intense than he was used to. His power had grown, but so had the cost of wielding it. As the Pangoro reeled, a new presence exploded onto the scene. A blur of midnight blue and shadow, moving with impossible speed. A shuriken made of pure, compressed water sliced through the air, striking the Pangoro in the chest and forcing it back another step. The figure landed in a crouch between Ash and the hollowed Pokémon, its long, pink tongue wrapped around its neck like a scarf. Ash's breath caught in his throat. The bond, a connection he had carried in a quiet corner of his soul, flared to life, a sudden, brilliant warmth that chased away the encroaching cold. "Greninja," he whispered. The Pokémon glanced back at him, its red eyes sharp and knowing. There was no need for a reunion speech. The threat that had pulled Greninja away from Kalos, the creeping tendrils of negative energy he had been tasked to hunt and destroy, was here. Its presence was a declaration that the fight had come home. Ash nodded, a surge of adrenaline sharpening his focus. The bond with Greninja clicked into place, as natural as breathing. The world seemed to slow down, colors deepening. The roar of their synchronized spirits drowned out the hollow silence. Let's do this, Ash said, his voice ringing with renewed power. A vortex of water erupted around Greninja, cloaking it, reshaping it. When the torrent subsided, the giant water shuriken was on its back, its faceplate sharpened, its power level skyrocketing. Ash Greninja was here. Water shuriken. Ash commanded. Greninja leaped, becoming a phantom. It didn't throw one shuriken, but 5 in rapid succession. They didn't fly in a straight line. Guided by Ash's strategic will, they curved, creating a cage of razor-sharp water around the Pangoro, cutting off its retreat. The hollowed Pokémon showed no fear. It simply swung its stalk, trying to bat the attacks away. But its movements were too slow, too predictable. The shuriken struck its limbs, its torso, not with the force to maim, but to pin. From the stands, Serena watched, her hand covering her mouth. The cold wave of despair had hit her, too, a sudden wave of apathy so strong she almost slumped in her seat. It felt like the very soul of her performance, the joy and connection she tried to create, was being inverted. But then she saw him. She saw the blue light, a shield of pure hope. She saw Greninja's return. She saw the transformation she had witnessed once before, a bond so perfect it became a physical manifestation of power. And the fear was replaced by a fire. Ash, back in the plaza, Diantha had recovered, her champion's poise returning. She and her Auroras were now directing the evacuation, creating ice walls to funnel the panicked crowds to safety. She watched Ash and Greninja, her strategic mind analyzing the impossible synergy before her. This was not a trainer and his Pokémon. This was a single warrior, fighting on 2 fronts. Greninja, get in close. Aerial Ace. Greninja blurred, weaving through its own shuriken attacks. The Pangoro swung wildly, but it was like trying to hit smoke. Greninja appeared before it, its leg glowing with a white light, and delivered a precise, powerful kick to the Pokémon's chest. The impact should have sent it flying. Instead, the Pangoro barely moved. It was unnaturally dense, its hollow nature giving it a strange, physical inertia. But the attack wasn't about damage. Now, Pikachu. Thunderbolt, on Greninja's back. The order was insane. Diantha's eyes went wide. Attacking your own Pokémon? But Pikachu understood. He leaped from Ash's shoulder, a yellow bolt of lightning, and landed squarely on the giant water shuriken on Greninja's back. He unleashed a full-power thunderbolt, not at the Pangoro, but directly into the water shuriken. The effect was instantaneous. The water, a perfect conductor, absorbed the electricity, and the giant shuriken began to glow and crackle, transforming from a blade of water to a spinning vortex of electrified plasma. That's, Diantha breathed, her mind struggling to process the tactic. That's impossible. Fusion Pulse. Ash yelled, giving the impromptu move a name. Discharge. Greninja grabbed the supercharged shuriken from its back and, with a powerful roar, hurled it. The spinning disk of electrified water didn't just cut, it detonated on impact. A massive dome of steam and electricity erupted through the plaza, a controlled explosion that engulfed the hollowed Pangoro. When the energy subsided, the Pangoro was on the ground, unconscious. But something was different. The vacant, milky whiteness in its eyes was gone, replaced by the normal, dark pupils of a healthy Pokémon. The oppressive gray haze around it had vanished. The cold spot in the world was gone, replaced by the normal, bustling energy of the city. They hadn't just knocked it out. They had cleansed it. Ash stood, panting slightly, the bond with Greninja receding, leaving the ninja frog standing stoically beside him. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and the chilling certainty of what this all meant. The fight was no longer on some distant frontier. The darkness had breached the walls. The moon was a perfect silver disk hanging over the skyline of Lumio City, its light painting the sculpted gardens of Vert Plaza in shades of silver and deep indigo. The chaotic energy of the stadium felt a world away. Here, the only sounds were the gentle whisper of a breeze through the manicured hedges and the distant, rhythmic chime of the prism tower. Ash stood by a stone railing overlooking a serene pond, watching the moonlight dance on the water's surface. The jacket he'd worn for the ceremony was gone, leaving him in a simple black t-shirt. He'd managed to slip away from the league officials and the press, all of whom were in a frenzy over what they were calling the Plaza incident. They wanted answers he didn't have. Or rather, answers they wouldn't understand. Greninja was gone again, having melted back into the shadows with a silent nod. Its duty was clear, a lonely vigil against an unseen enemy. Pikachu was dozing on a nearby bench, exhausted from the battle and the subsequent sensory overload. A soft footstep on the gravel path behind him made him turn. Serena stood there, her elegant performance dress swapped for a simple, comfortable sweater and jeans. Her hair was down, catching the moonlight like a halo. In her hands, she held 2 steaming cups. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of relief, concern, and that deep, unwavering understanding that had always been uniquely hers. "Thought you might need this," she said softly, her voice a balm to his frayed nerves. She handed him one of the cups. It was hot chocolate, rich and sweet. The warmth seeped into his hands. "Thanks," he said, his voice a little rough. "How did you get away?" "The Kalos Queen has her privileges," she said with a small, wry smile. "And a few secret exits from the stadium. It helps when you've designed half the backstage choreography." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks. It was an easy quiet, one born of years of friendship and a bond that distance had failed to weaken. It was the same as it had always been, yet different. The youthful uncertainty was gone, replaced by a mature, unspoken affection. "That was terrifying, Ash," she finally said, her gaze distant. "That feeling. The coldness. It was like all the joy in the world just vanished." Ash nodded, staring down into his cup. "I've been feeling it for a while now. Little pockets of it, out in the wild. A forest where the Pokémon are silent. A lake with no reflection. It's getting stronger. Closer. The Pangoro," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Its eyes, there was nothing there. What was that? "I don't know what to call it," Ash admitted, frustration lacing his tone. "It's like its spirit was scooped out. Hollowed. All that was left was an empty shell." He took a deep, shaky breath. "When I used my aura to block it, I could feel it. The emptiness. It's the opposite of aura. Aura is life, connection, emotion. This is nothing. Silence." Serena looked at him, her brow furrowed in thought. "When I perform, I feel the emotions of the crowd. It's like a song we all create together. Lately, it's been harder. It feels like I'm pushing against something. A resistance. A kind of apathy that isn't coming from the people themselves. It's like I'm trying to sing in a vacuum." He looked up, meeting her eyes. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. His battle against the encroaching silence, and her battle against the encroaching apathy. They weren't separate struggles. They were 2 fronts in the same war. "It's the same thing," he said, the realization settling in his gut like a stone. "It's a force that drains emotion. Connection. Life. And it's spreading." The magnitude of it washed over him. This wasn't a villainous team trying to steal Pokémon. This wasn't a legendary Pokémon having a bad day. This was a fundamental force of nature, an enemy you couldn't punch. How do you fight a shadow that wants to swallow the world? How do you battle an opponent whose very nature is the absence of everything? He felt a sudden, profound exhaustion. He was Ash Ketchum, the hero, the legend in the making who had stood against gods and monsters. But right now, he felt like a boy standing at the edge of an ocean of ink, and the tide was coming in. The power he wielded, his aura, was a firefly in a hurricane. It was bright, yes, but it was also small, and so terribly alone. He looked at Serena. She was watching him, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't looking at the hero. She was looking at him. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the weight on his shoulders. She had always been the one who could see past the legend, past the trainer, to the person underneath. In that moment, under the pale Kalos moon, everything became blindingly, terrifyingly clear. His journey had never truly been a solo one. He was strong because of his Pokémon. He was brave because of his friends. He found his way because of the bonds that tied him to the world. And the strongest of those bonds, the one that had been a quiet, constant North Star through all his wanderings, was standing right in front of him. She wasn't just a friend. She wasn't just a memory of a journey past. She was his anchor. In a world that was threatening to be consumed by emptiness, she was the one person who filled him with a sense of purpose so powerful it could push back the dark. He needed that. He needed her. Not just as a companion, but as a partner. As the other half of his strength. The realization wasn't a gentle dawn. It was a lightning strike, the same kind of absolute certainty he felt in the heat of a critical battle. It was a strategic choice and an emotional surrender, all at once. He put his cup down on the railing. He turned to face her fully, his expression so serious, so intense, that she took a small step back in surprise. "Serena," he began, his voice low and steady. "All this time, I've been traveling, getting stronger, thinking that was the answer. That if I was just powerful enough, I could handle anything. But I was wrong." He took her free hand. Her skin was warm against his. "This thing, this emptiness. I can't fight it alone. My aura, it's a part of me, but it's volatile. I can feel it. Fighting that thing today, it took more out of me than I expected. It's like I'm a flame, and this silence is a wind trying to blow me out." Her eyes were wide, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never heard him speak like this, with such raw, unvarnished vulnerability. "What I'm trying to say is," he faltered, searching for the right words. He gave up, opting for the simple, terrifying truth. "It's always been you. From the day we met again at Santalon, through everything with Team Flare, even when we were worlds apart. You've always made me stronger. You're the one who makes the world feel real. Not hollow." He took a deep breath, his gaze locked with hers, a silent vow already passing between them. "I don't know what this coming fight is going to look like. I don't know if we can win. But I know I don't want to face it without you. I can't face it without you." He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing a slow circle over her skin. The question that came next was not born of romance novels or fairy tales. It was forged in the heat of an impending war, a desperate, necessary plea from a soldier to his most trusted ally. It was the most important strategic decision of his life. "Serena," he said, his voice imbued with all the conviction of a final command in a championship match. "Will you fight this with me? Will you be my partner in all of it?" He held her gaze, his heart in his throat. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the cool night air, more powerful than any Z move, more impactful than any mega evolution. It was a vow offered, an alliance proposed, a confession of love and need all wrapped in one. Serena stared at him, speechless. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, earth-shattering recognition. This was it. This was the culmination of their entire journey, the unspoken truth that had hummed between them for years, now laid bare by the threat of a silent apocalypse. Her answer was not just a word. It was a promise. It was the closing of a circle, and the beginning of a legend. She let out a shaky, laughing sob, and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Yes," she whispered into his shirt, her voice thick with emotion. "Of course, yes." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, a feeling of profound, grounding relief washing over him. The cold emptiness of the world still loomed at the edges of his senses, a promise of the darkness to come. But here, in his arms, he held the flame that would light their way through it. He held his heart, his anchor, his queen. The fight for the world had just begun. Chapter 2, The Weight of the Crown. The world held its breath for a single, perfect moment. The ambient light of Lumio City seemed to bend around them, creating a private universe in the moonlit Vert Plaza. For Ash, the roar of the stadium, the chilling emptiness of the hollowed Pokémon, the crushing weight of the future, it all dissolved into the feeling of Serena's arms wrapped around his neck, the warmth of her quiet, tearful yes against his chest. He held her as if she were the last point of gravity in the universe, the only thing keeping him from spinning off into the cold, silent void he now knew was waiting. Serena pulled back slightly, her hands framing his face. Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, were luminous in the moonlight. She was searching his face, not for doubt, but for confirmation, for the shared reality of the moment. She found it in the steady, unwavering intensity of his gaze. "You're serious," she whispered, a laugh bubbling up with the words, full of disbelief and profound joy. "You really just. You just did that." "I'm always serious when it counts," he replied, a slow smile spreading across his face, the first genuine, unburdened smile he'd felt in hours. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said, her voice dropping, becoming as intimate as the quiet space between them. "It's just, after all this time, all the goodbyes. I never thought our next hello would be this." "I'm done with goodbyes, Serena," he said, and the simple finality in his tone was a vow in itself. "Whatever comes next, we face it from the same side. Always." The sound of a frantic Pika-Pi broke the spell. Pikachu, having been startled awake by the sudden shift in emotional energy, was now perched on the back of the bench, his head cocked, looking between them with an expression of pure, unadulterated confusion. Serena laughed, a clear, bright sound that felt like a direct counterspell to the day's darkness. "I think we broke your best friend." Ash grinned, reaching out and scratching Pikachu under the chin. "He'll get over it. We've got bigger things to deal with." His smile faded slightly as the reality of his own words settled back in. The proposal wasn't just a culmination of their feelings, it was a declaration of war. A necessary first step. Serena seemed to sense the shift. Her expression softened, her joy tempered by the gravity of their situation. "So what is the first step, Ash? We can't just announce to the world that we're getting married to fight a soul-eating emptiness. They'll lock us up." "We start with what we know," he said, his mind already shifting into the familiar gear of strategy. "We need information. That thing in the plaza, the way it felt, the way it moved, it wasn't natural. Someone or something is causing this. And we need to find out who, and how." He looked towards the gleaming shape of the Prism Tower, a beacon of science and knowledge. "And I know just who to ask." The Clemontic Laboratory, nestled within the lower levels of Prism Tower, was a familiar symphony of chaos. Sparks occasionally flew from a jury-rigged console, a robotic arm attempted to pour coffee and mostly mist, and blueprints for inventions both brilliant and baffling were tacked to every available surface. Clement himself was hunched over a holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration as he analyzed security footage from the stadium incident. Data streams scrolled past his glasses, reflecting in the lenses. His sister, Bonnie, sat on a stool beside him, her Deden asleep in her lap, while her ever-present bag, where Zygarde Core, Squishy, once resided, sat on the table. She was swinging her legs, looking bored and worried all at once. "The energy signature is a complete paradox," Clement muttered, adjusting his glasses. "It absorbs kinetic energy with minimal displacement, and its thermal readings are impossibly low. It's a localized entropic field, but that's not possible. It violates the laws of thermodynamics." "In English, Big Brother?" Bonnie sighed. "It's like a hole in the world," Clement said, exasperated. A spot where energy just stops. It's not that it's cold, it's that heat refuses to exist there. The lab doors hissed open, and Ash and Serena stepped inside. Clement and Bonnie looked up, their expressions immediately shifting to relief. Ash. Serena. You're okay. Bonnie exclaimed, hopping off her stool and rushing to hug Serena. We were so worried. The news is going crazy. We're fine, Bonnie, Serena said, returning the hug warmly. Clement stood up, a deep line of concern etched on his face. Ash, what was that? I've been running diagnostics, and I've never seen anything like it. And your aura, the output was massive, but the signature was so controlled. It was incredible. Ash nodded, walking over to the console. It's a long story, Clement. But we need your help. We think this is just the beginning. He and Serena spent the next hour explaining everything. Not just the incident at the stadium, but the cold spots Ash had been sensing for months, and the apathy Serena had felt pushing against her performances. They spoke of the hollowed-out feeling, the draining emptiness, and the chilling conclusion that it was a deliberate, spreading phenomenon. Clement listened, his initial scientific skepticism giving way to dawning horror. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his mind racing. A force that consumes emotion, that nullifies life energy. This goes beyond physics. This is metaphysical. We need to find a pattern, Serena said, her voice firm and clear. She was no longer just a worried friend, she was a partner in this, her mind already working on the problem. Where have these incidents been reported before? Are there any historical records of anything similar? Good question. Clement's fingers flew across his keyboard. I can cross-reference global news reports, social media chatter, and official Pokémon Ranger bulletins for keywords like vacant, unresponsive, or emotionless Pokémon. It'll take some time to filter the noise, but my new algorithm should be able to flag credible patterns. As Clement dove into his work, Ash turned to Serena, a quiet look passing between them. There was one more piece of news to share. He took her hand, a simple gesture that immediately drew Bonnie's attention. Guys? Bonnie said, her eyes wide as she looked at their joined hands. Ash took a deep breath. Clement, Bonnie, there's something else. We wanted you two to be the first to know. He looked at Serena, who gave him an encouraging nod. Serena and I, we're getting married. The frantic clicking of the keyboard stopped. Clement froze, his mouth slightly agape. Bonnie's jaw dropped, and a slow, massive grin spread across her face. Finally, she shrieked, pumping her fists in the air. Deden woke with a startled squeak. I knew it. I always knew it. I've been telling Clement for years but he never listens. Clement, for his part, looked like his circuits had been fried. He blinked once, then twice, before a clumsy, overjoyed smile broke through his shock. Married? Wow. That's wonderful news. Congratulations. I mean, it's a bit sudden, but it's fantastic. A perfect logistical and emotional pairing. In the midst of the happy chaos, a notification chimed from Clement's main monitor. A news alert. The headline was stark: Ketchum's power surge, heroics or a dangerous anomaly? Experts question unidentified energy. The mood in the lab sobered instantly. They gathered around the screen. A newscaster was speaking in grave tones, showing a grainy, looped clip of Ash's aura shield erupting in the plaza. The footage was edited, cutting just before the Pangoro attacked the child, making Ash's action look like an unprovoked blast of energy. Sources within the Pokémon League have expressed significant concern over the unregulated use of this power, the reporter stated. And a new, anonymous group calling itself the Order of Silence has released a statement claiming this aura energy is the cause of the recent Pokémon behavioral anomalies, destabilizing their life force. A face appeared on screen. A man, handsome and serene, with kind eyes and a charismatic smile. He was identified only as Cashin, a concerned philosopher. For too long, our world has been rocked by the violent energies of conflict, Cashin said, his voice smooth and persuasive. These powers, like Mr. Ketchum's, are born of extreme emotion. They are the problem, not the solution. True peace, a beautiful world, can only be achieved through tranquility. Through silence. Ash felt a chill run down his spine. The man's words were twisted, a perversion of the truth, but they were delivered with such calm conviction that he knew people would listen. This was their enemy. He had a face, a voice, and a strategy. He wasn't attacking them with Pokemon, he was attacking them with ideology. He's framing you, Serena said, her voice tight with anger. He's using your own power against you. And it's working, Clement added, pointing to a sidebar showing a rapid-fire scroll of public comments. Fear, confusion, suspicion. Cashin's narrative was taking hold. The pressure was on. Their personal joy was immediately overshadowed by a public relations nightmare and an escalating threat. Before they could even plan a wedding, they were on trial in the court of public opinion. We need more than just data, Clement, Ash said, his jaw set. We need answers. Real answers. He looked over at the bookshelf, where Professor Sycamore's number was pinned. I think it's time we brought in an expert on Kalos history. Professor Sycamore's laboratory was a stark contrast to Clement's. It was bright, airy, and organized, filled with the scent of old books and brewing coffee. The professor himself, perpetually energetic and stylish, greeted them with a warm embrace, but his eyes were clouded with concern. Ash, Serena. I am so glad you are safe, he said, leading them to a large table in his research library. I was watching the match. What a victory. And then, that. I've been fielding calls all morning. The league is in an uproar. They laid out the situation for him, just as they had for Clement. Sycamore listened intently, his fingers steepled, his sharp mind absorbing every detail. When they got to Cashin and the Order of Silence, he let out a heavy sigh. Cashin, he said, his voice low. I know of him. He was a junior researcher here, years ago. Brilliant, but detached. He was an acolyte of Lysandra. The name landed in the room with a thud. Lysandra. Team Flare. The mad dream of a beautiful world, enforced by wiping the slate clean. Cashin believed Lysandra's goal was noble, but his methods were too noisy, Sycamore continued, his expression grim. He believed true beauty was in stillness. In the absence of passion, which he saw as the root of all suffering. He resigned after the Team Flare incident, vanished. It seems he has found a new, more insidious way to pursue his philosophy. While they spoke, Clement, who had connected remotely from his lab, was working furiously. Professor, Serena had an idea about cross-referencing historical records, he said, his voice coming from a speaker on the table. I've isolated a few key terms from Ash's description: hollow, silence, guardian. I'm scanning the Kalos digital archives for any mention of these, but it's mostly poetic nonsense. Wait, Sycamore said, his eyes lighting up. Guardian. Don't search the digital records. They're too new. The important histories, the ones that were deemed too esoteric or mythic for modern databases, are still in their original forms. He walked over to a climate-controlled vault in the corner of the library and entered a code. The heavy door swung open, revealing shelves of ancient, leather-bound tomes and fragile scrolls. Most of this is pre-modern Kalosian lore, dismissed as fairy tales, Sycamore explained, running his fingers along the spines. But sometimes, fairy tales are just history that people have forgotten how to read. He pulled out a heavy, crumbling book, its cover stamped with a stylized image of the Anistar city sundial. He carefully laid it on the table, the pages crackling as he opened them. The text was in an archaic dialect of the Kalos language. What does it say? Serena asked, leaning closer. Sycamore traced the faded script with a gloved finger, translating as he went. It speaks of a cyclical blight, a cosmic force that seeks to unsing the song of creation. It calls it the Great Silence. He flipped a few more pages. The lore is fragmented, but it says that in each cycle, the world's life force, what the ancients called the song, and what we now might call aura, chooses a champion. A guardian, whose spirit burns bright enough to hold back the tide of nothingness. Ash felt a shiver of recognition. A guardian. But the guardian's power is a raging fire, Sycamore read, his voice dropping in awe. Unchecked, it would consume the wielder and scorch the very world he seeks to protect. It needs an anchor. A focal point. He looked up, his eyes wide, meeting Serena's. It says the guardian's power can only be stabilized and truly unlocked through a perfect soul bond with a heart, an individual whose own spirit resonates not with raw power, but with the pure emotional harmony of the world's song. A spirit capable of inspiring connection, of reminding the world of its own voice. Serena's breath hitched. A performer who captivates millions, pushing back against a wave of apathy. The text was clear. It wasn't just about Ash. It was about both of them. Professor, Ash said, his voice barely a whisper. What does it say they have to do? Sycamore's gaze fell back to the book. He read the final lines of the passage, his expression a mixture of shock and wonder. To face the silence, the guardian's fire and the heart's song must become one. Their bond must be formalized, their spirits intertwined through a sacred, unbreakable vow. He looked up at them, the implication hanging in the air like a physical weight. The prophecy says they have to get married. The room was silent. What had been a personal, heartfelt decision made in a moonlit park was now a line of text in a forgotten book. A key to a prophecy. A weapon in an ancient war. Their love was not just their own anymore, it was a matter of global security. The speaker on the table crackled to life. Ash? Serena? You have an incoming priority call, Clement's voice said, sounding strained. It's Champion Diantha. And she does not sound happy. The meeting was held in Diantha's private office high within the Lumiose gym, a sleek, minimalist room with a panoramic window overlooking the city. The champion stood by the window, her back to them, a portrait of regal displeasure. Ash and Serena sat on a leather sofa, the weight of the last few hours pressing down on them. A public engagement, Diantha said, her voice dangerously quiet. She finally turned, her expression unreadable. Hours after a major incident that you were at the center of. The timing is suboptimal. It wasn't a publicity stunt, Diantha, Serena said, her tone respectful but firm. She was the Kalos queen. In this room, she was Diantha's peer as much as Ash was. It was a personal decision. A personal decision that is now a political crisis, Diantha countered, gesturing to a screen on her wall displaying Cashin's face. This order of silence is gaining traction. People are afraid. They're painting Ash as a menace, and this engagement as a reckless, emotional distraction. I'm getting pressure from the other league champions, from the International Pokémon Federation. They want you to lay low. To be evaluated. There's no time for that, Ash said, standing up. He would not be talked down to like a child. Cashin isn't just talking. He's making a move. That Pangoro was one of his. And there are more. He and Serena, with Sycamore and Clement's help, laid out the prophecy. They spoke of the guardian and the heart, the great silence, and the vow. Diantha listened, her expression shifting from stern disapproval to deep, profound skepticism. A prophecy? From a dusty book? Ash, I respect your power, and Serena, I admire your spirit. But you are asking me to stake the security of my region on a fairy tale. It's real, Ash insisted. I can feel it. We can feel it. Feeling is not evidence, Diantha said, her voice softening slightly. I cannot act on faith alone. I need to see it. As if on cue, a piercing alarm blared through the office. A red light flashed on Diantha's console. An aide's panicked voice came over the intercom. Champion. It's an emergency. There's a coordinated attack on the Kalos power plant. Multiple Pokémon, exhibiting the same vacant behavior as the one at the stadium, have breached the perimeter. Diantha's eyes widened in horror. The power plant supplied energy to all of Lumios and the surrounding areas. An attack there. They're not just trying to cause a blackout. Clement's voice suddenly crackled from Ash's PokeNav. I'm tracking the energy readings. They're targeting the primary conversion turbines. If they overload them with that null energy, they could create a massive, permanent dead zone. The entire area would become like that plaza, but on a citywide scale. Diantha looked from the flashing console to Ash and Serena. The skepticism in her eyes was replaced by the hard gleam of a champion facing a crisis. Her request to see it was about to be granted in the most terrifying way possible. My car is downstairs, she said, already grabbing a set of Pokeballs from her desk. You're with me. The scene at the power plant was worse than they imagined. A dozen Pokémon, Tauros, Magneton, Arcanine, were rampaging through the facility, their eyes the same milky white voids, their bodies wrapped in the same light-devouring gray haze. They were systematically smashing equipment, their movements synchronized and unnervingly silent. The plant's security forces were pinned down, their Pokémon's attacks being absorbed by the hollows with little effect. Gardevoir, Moonblast. Aurorus, Blizzard. Diantha commanded, leaping into action. Her two powerhouse Pokémon unleashed their attacks, but while the force was immense, the hollows seemed to just endure it, the energy dissipating into their auras. They were damaged, but not stopped. The sheer wrongness of it was unnerving. It's not enough to hit them with power, Ash realized, watching the battle. We have to fill the emptiness inside them. He looked at Serena. The prophecy, the heart song, it said you could remind the world of its own voice. Serena's eyes darted around the chaotic scene, then to a nearby security hub. Clement, she yelled into her device. Can you access the plant's emergency broadcast system? The PA speakers? The main controls are fried, but I can bypass them. I'll need a minute, he replied. Ash, Diantha. Buy me that minute. Serena yelled, already running for the relative safety of the control hub. With pleasure, Diantha said, a grim smile on her face. Gardevoir, Psychic. Clear a path. Ash, Diantha, Pikachu, and Greninja, who had appeared from the shadows the moment they arrived, formed a defensive line, a desperate holding action against the silent, advancing tide. It was a brutal, grinding fight. They weren't trying to win, they were just trying not to lose. Then, a voice. It started as a low hum from the PA speakers, then swelled into a clear, powerful melody. It was Serena's voice. She wasn't singing a pop song. This was something else. A simple, resonant melody, almost like a lullaby, with no words. It was pure emotion, a song of hope, courage, and connection, broadcast across the entire facility. The effect was immediate and profound. The hollowed Pokémon faltered. Their relentless advance slowed. The gray haze around them seemed to thin, the oppressive silence lessening. The plant workers, who had been cowering in fear, looked up, a spark of resolve returning to their eyes. It was as if her voice was a light, pushing back the shadows, reminding them what it felt like to feel. Ash felt it like a surge of pure power. The song resonated with his own aura, feeding it, amplifying it. The weary drain he'd felt before was gone, replaced by an overflowing wellspring of energy. He and Greninja locked eyes, the water vortex erupting around the frog Pokémon, their bond flaring to its absolute peak. Now, Ash! Diantha yelled, witnessing the change, her voice filled with awe. Pikachu, Greninja, everyone. Focus on me. Ash commanded. He didn't order an attack. He closed his eyes, drawing on the feeling of Serena's song, on the hope of the people around him, on his bond with his Pokémon. He thrust his hands forward, and it was not a shield or a beam that emerged. It was a wave. A wave of brilliant, warm, golden blue light erupted from his body, expanding outward in a gentle, silent pulse. It washed over the battlefield. It wasn't an attack. It didn't blast or burn. It passed through the hollowed Pokémon, and as it did, the gray haze dissolved. Color and light returned to their eyes. The vacant emptiness was filled. One by one, the rampaging Pokémon stumbled, shook their heads as if waking from a long nightmare, and looked around in confusion, their spirits restored. The pulse faded, and Ash stood, breathing heavily but steadily, the power receding. The silence that followed was not the cold, dead silence of the null. It was the stunned, reverent silence of witnesses to a miracle. Serena's song faded out. She ran from the control hub, her face flushed with exertion. Her gaze found Ash's across the now quiet facility. Diantha recalled her Pokémon, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at the now docile Pokémon, then at Ash, then at Serena. The skepticism was gone, replaced by an expression of absolute, staggering belief. "The Guardian's fire," she whispered, looking at Ash. She then turned to Serena. "And the heart's song." She finally understood. This wasn't a distraction. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was the only thing that could save them. The sun was setting over Anistar City, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Its last rays struck the great crystal of the sundial, refracting into 1,000 tiny rainbows. There was no crowd. There were no cameras. There was no lavish ceremony. There was only Ash and Serena, standing before the ancient, humming crystal. Professor Sycamore stood before them, the old tome in his hands. Clement, Bonnie, and Diantha stood as their only witnesses, a small circle of allies bound by the secret they now shared. Ash was in a simple black suit, looking sharper and more mature than ever. Serena wore a simple, elegant white dress, her hair adorned with a single, small flower. They looked not like children playing dress-up, but like two sovereigns about to be coronated. "We are gathered here," Sycamore began, his voice filled with a sense of history and destiny, not just to join two people in marriage, but to honor a sacred pact. To witness the forging of a vow foretold by the ancients. He looked to Ash. "Do you, Ash Ketchum, accept the mantle of the Guardian? Do you vow to be the shield that stands against the silence, the flame that guards the world's life, and to cherish, protect, and stand with your heart, now and for all your days?" Ash turned to Serena, his eyes holding hers, his voice clear and strong. "I do." Sycamore then turned to Serena. "And do you, Serena Yvonne, accept the role of the heart? Do you vow to be the song that pushes back the quiet, the voice that reminds the world of its joy, and to cherish, support, and stand with your guardian, now and for all your days?" Serena's smile was radiant, her gaze never leaving Ash's. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the history of this region, and by the will of the world itself," Sycamore declared, his voice ringing with emotion, "I pronounce you guardian and heart. I pronounce you husband and wife." Ash leaned in and kissed her. It was not a tentative, youthful kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of partnership, of a shared destiny accepted. It was the sealing of the vow. And as their lips met, the great Anistar sundial responded. The crystal began to glow, a soft, ethereal light that grew in intensity until it was a blinding, beautiful nova of pure energy. A silent, invisible wave of power radiated out from the sundial, washing over them, over the city, and spreading across the entire Kalos region. Bonnie gasped, clutching her bag. "Squishy. I can feel him. He's happy." Diantha felt it as a surge of warmth and hope, a palpable force that settled over the land like a protective blanket. Clement's devices, which he had set up nearby, went haywire, their needles spiking off the charts, measuring a wave of positive, life-affirming energy the likes of which had never been recorded. The light subsided, leaving Ash and Serena standing in the twilight, hand in hand. They were still them. But they were also more. Their bond was no longer just a feeling. It was a power. A weapon. A crown they now wore together. Their marriage was not the end of a love story. It was the first shot fired in the war for the soul of the world. Chapter 3, The Guardian and the Queen. The name of the valley was lost to time, a secret kept not by maps, but by the land itself. It was a place tucked into the rugged highlands of Kalos, accessible only through a winding, overgrown path that seemed to deliberately mislead outsiders. Professor Sycamore had called it a honeymoon destination with a wink, but Ash and Serena understood its true purpose. This was a sanctuary. A training ground. The air itself tasted sweet, thick with a life energy so potent it felt like breathing in liquid sunlight. Waterfalls, shimmering with an almost conscious iridescence, poured down sheer cliffs of moss-covered stone into a turquoise river. The trees were ancient and enormous, their branches weaving a canopy that dappled the forest floor in a perpetual, gentle twilight. It felt like a place where the world's song, which Sycamore's book had spoken of, was played at full volume. A place connected, they knew, to the distant, life-giving aura of the Tree of Beginning. The first few days were a quiet revelation. They woke not to hotel alarms or the bustle of a Pokémon center, but to the chorus of bird Pokémon and the soft light filtering through the leaves outside their small, rustic cabin. Ash found himself waking early, content to simply watch Serena sleep, her face peaceful in the dawn, a profound sense of rightness settling in his chest. The vow at the sundial hadn't been a magical spell that changed them, but an affirmation of something that had always been there, giving it weight and form. It was a foundation, solid and real, and he felt more grounded than he ever had in his life. Their training began on the third morning. This was not about learning new moves or pushing for more power. It was about control and synergy. Ash's task was one of finesse. He stood before a large, perfectly round boulder in a clearing by the river. His goal was not to destroy it, but to move it. Focus, he muttered to himself, Pikachu watching from a nearby rock. It's not a battle. It's a conversation. He closed his eyes, extending his hands. He reached out with his aura, feeling for the stone's inert energy, its simple, heavy existence. He remembered the raw, untamed power he had used against the hollowed Pangoro and tried to summon a fraction of it. He summoned too much. A blast of blue energy shot from his hands and the boulder didn't move, it exploded, showering the clearing in a hail of gravel. Pikachu yelped and dove for cover. Ash flinched, opening his eyes to the cloud of dust. Okay. Too much conversation. He spent hours at it. The next attempt, he overcompensated, producing a trickle of aura so faint it wouldn't have disturbed a leaf. He gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. The raw power was easy. It was a shout. This required a whisper. He thought of Serena's song, the way it had been powerful yet gentle. He thought of her hand in his. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and reached out again. This time, he didn't try to push. He tried to connect. He felt the stone's weight, its texture, its place in the world. He wrapped his aura around it like a hand, and with a soft, blue glow, the massive boulder lifted a few inches off the ground, hovering silently. It trembled, the effort immense, but it held. Ash let out a shaky laugh, a wide grin breaking across his face. He held it for 10 seconds before the boulder dropped with a heavy thud. He was panting, drained, but triumphant. He hadn't just learned control. He had learned a new language. Serena's training was more abstract. Her power was tied to life, to emotion. She couldn't just practice on rocks. Ash led her to a small, secluded meadow where a patch of sun-starved wildflowers were wilted and brown. The book said the heart's song could remind the world of its joy, he said, gesturing to the flowers. Let's see what that means. Serena knelt, her expression thoughtful. Her first instinct was to perform. She closed her eyes and projected a feeling of bright, overwhelming happiness, the same kind of explosive joy she used in her grand finales. She imagined the flowers blooming, bathed in light. Nothing happened. The flowers remained wilted, their stems limp. She frowned in frustration. "What am I doing wrong?" she asked, looking at Ash. "I'm giving them everything I have." Ash sat beside her, picking up one of the wilted stems. "When you're on stage, you're broadcasting to thousands of people. It's a big, beautiful wave they can all feel," he explained, thinking back to his own struggle with the boulder. "But this isn't an audience. It's one living thing. Maybe it's not about feeling for them. Maybe it's about feeling with them." Feeling with them. The words clicked. She had been trying to impose her emotion onto the flowers. She hadn't been listening. She closed her eyes again. This time, she didn't project. She reached out with her spirit, her empathy, the core of what made her performances so resonant. She felt the flowers' weakness, their faint, thirsty struggle for life. She felt their memory of the sun. She didn't try to overwhelm that feeling with her own. Instead, she harmonized with it. She began to hum, a soft, simple melody, weaving her own energy into their faint life song. She offered not a command to grow, but an invitation. A shared hope. Slowly, miraculously, it began to work. A faint green blush appeared on the brown stems. The wilted petals trembled and began to unfurl, their faded colors deepening into vibrant shades of violet and gold. Within minutes, the entire patch was alive, blooming with a radiance that seemed to defy the shade they grew in. Serena opened her eyes, gasping at the sight. It was one thing to win a crowd. It was another to coax life from the brink of death. She looked at Ash, her eyes shining. "I understand," she whispered. Her power wasn't a performance. It was a connection. Their synchronized training was the true test. In a wide, flat basin, Ash's Charizard and Pikachu squared off against him and Greninja. It was a familiar, high-speed spar, a dance of fire, lightning, and water they had practiced 1,000 times. "Okay, Serena. Now." Ash called out. Serena stood on a ledge overlooking the basin. She took a deep breath and began to sing. But like with the flowers, this was different. It wasn't a performance for a crowd. It was a targeted broadcast. She focused her will, projecting a single, pure concept directly into Ash and Greninja's minds: clarity. For Ash, the effect was like a switch being flipped. The chaos of battle simplified. He saw every twitch of Charizard's wing, every spark on Pikachu's cheek. His bond with Greninja deepened, their thoughts moving as one. The world didn't slow down, they simply moved faster, more precisely, within it. "Greninja, double team, then water shuriken," Ash commanded. The command was almost unnecessary. Greninja was already moving. A dozen shadow clones flickered into existence, but they weren't just distractions. Guided by Serena's song of clarity, each clone moved with perfect, strategic purpose, herding Charizard and Pikachu into a preset choke point. The real Greninja leaped, the giant shuriken on its back forming in half the usual time. He hurled it, and the attack flew with an unerring accuracy that was almost frightening. Charizard blasted it with a flamethrower, but it was too late. The shuriken's edge clipped its wing, forcing it to land. Pikachu's thunderbolt was dodged with a fluid grace that was breathtaking. The spar ended. Charizard and Pikachu were panting but unharmed. Ash and Greninja stood ready, the synergy between them humming like a plucked string. "Wow," Ash breathed, the link with Greninja receding. He looked up at Serena, a look of pure awe on his face. "It's like, you clear away all the noise. All that's left is the path to victory." Serena smiled, her own face glowing with the effort. The Guardian's fire, and the Heart's song, she said, her voice full of a newfound confidence. We're really doing this. This idyllic, focused period of discovery was shattered by the roar of a jet engine. They looked up to see a sleek, black aircraft slicing through the sky before deploying landing gear and touching down on the far side of the river basin with military precision. The ramp lowered, and a single figure strode out. He was tall and imposing, dressed in a black coat, his stark white hair a sharp contrast. At his side walked a Charizard, its black and blue scales marking it as one of the most powerful of its kind. Ash's posture stiffened. The easy warmth of the training ground was replaced by a familiar, competitive fire. Alan. Alan stopped a good 50 feet away, his piercing blue eyes sweeping over the scene. He took in Serena on the ledge, Ash and Greninja standing together, the faint, lingering energy of their training. His expression was a mask of cold disappointment. I went to Professor Sycamore, Alan said, his voice flat and devoid of pleasantries. He said you were on a retreat. I had a feeling it was something more. He looked from Ash to Serena and back again. The news is everywhere, Ash. The battle with Diantha. The incident at the plaza. And then, an engagement. People are saying you've lost your focus. That you're distracted. You came all this way to check on me? Ash asked, his tone level, but his eyes were sharp. I came to see if the strongest trainer I ever fought still exists, Alan shot back, his voice cutting like glass. Or if he's been replaced by some prophet who's given up battling for prophecies and romance. He held up his wrist, revealing the key stone that glittered darkly. I came for a real battle. To remind you what true strength is. Or to confirm for myself that you've lost it. Serena felt a flash of anger. How dare he come here and speak to Ash that way? But Ash gave a subtle shake of his head, a silent message. Let me handle this. Ash took a step forward. You want a battle, Alan? You've got one. He looked at Greninja, who met his gaze with a fierce glint in its eye. But you should know, the rules have changed. Alan scoffed. Strength is the only rule that matters. He touched his key stone. Let's see if you still remember that. Charizard, Mega Evolve. An explosion of multicolored light engulfed Alan's Charizard. Its form twisted, grew, blue flames erupting from the sides of its mouth. When the light faded, Mega Charizard X stood there, a black dragon of pure, unadulterated power, letting out a roar that shook the very mountains. Ash didn't flinch. He and Greninja moved as one, the vortex of water rising to meet the challenge. Ash Greninja emerged, the giant water shuriken on its back gleaming. The two rivals stared each other down across the basin, a rematch years in the making. But this time, the stakes were far higher than any league trophy. Charizard, Flamethrower. Greninja, Water Shuriken. The battle was joined. A torrent of blue fire met a spinning disk of razor-sharp water in the center of the field, exploding in a massive cloud of steam. It was just like their league battle, a furious, high-speed clash of titans. Charizard was a force of nature, its draconic power shaping the battlefield. Dragon claws carved trenches in the earth, and thunder punches lit up the sky. Greninja was a phantom, a blur of motion that flowed around the raw power. It used the river, the trees, the very terrain to its advantage, its movements guided by Ash's sharp, strategic mind. To Alan, it felt like Ash was rusty. His Greninja was on the defensive, reacting more than attacking, its movements precise but lacking the overwhelming offensive pressure he remembered. Is this all you have left, Ash? Alan yelled over the din of another explosion. Are you just going to dance around until you fall? He saw an opening as Greninja landed after dodging a strike. Now. Flare Blitz. Charizard became a living meteor, cloaking itself in a vortex of fire and rocketing towards Greninja. It was a move designed for total annihilation. He's not rusty, Serena whispered from her perch, her knuckles white. He's waiting. Just as Charizard was about to make impact, Ash's command came, calm and clear. Cut. Greninja didn't dodge. It drew the two smaller kunai from its hips, which glowed with a faint white energy. It met the flare blitz head-on, not with a block, but with a precise, two-pronged strike that didn't hit Charizard's body, but the swirling vortex of fire around it. With two impossibly fast slashes, Greninja severed the energy flow of the attack. The flare blitz dissipated, leaving Charizard exposed and overextended, its momentum carrying it past a now unscathed Greninja. Alan's eyes widened in shock. It was impossible. No one could just cut an attack apart. Before he could recover, a new presence crashed the party. A guttural, inhuman roar echoed from the forest, a sound so full of rage and emptiness that it made the ground tremble. A colossal Ursaring, half again as large as a normal one, burst from the trees. Its fur was matted and patchy, and a sickening gray aura, identical to the one they'd seen on the Pangoro, pulsed around it, drinking the light. Its eyes were the same milky, vacant voids. It had been drawn by the sheer energy of their battle. The hollowed Ursaring ignored Ash and Greninja. Its dead eyes fixed on the biggest, most powerful source of energy it could see, Mega Charizard X. It charged, its claws glowing with a shadowy energy. Charizard, intercept it. Dragon Claw. Alan commanded, annoyed at the interruption but confident in his partner's power. Charizard met the charge, its own blue dragon claws clashing with the Ursaring's shadowy ones. The impact was immense, but something was wrong. Charizard was thrown back, skidding across the ground, shaking its head as if it had struck a mountain. The Ursaring hadn't even flinched. What? Alan breathed. Flamethrower. Full power. A massive jet of blue flame engulfed the hollowed beast. It should have been incinerated. Instead, the flames seemed to part around its gray aura, licking off its form without leaving so much as a scorch mark. The Ursaring stood there, untouched, and let out another hollow roar. It was absorbing the raw energy. Alan stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. His partner, one of the most powerful Pokémon in the world, was completely ineffective. His entire philosophy, his life's pursuit of overwhelming strength, was being rendered meaningless before his very eyes. It's no good, Alan. Ash's voice cut through his shock. Ash was no longer in a battle stance. He was standing calm, observant. He was in command. You can't fight it like that. Raw power just feeds it. He looked up at the ledge. Serena. Now. Alan looked up, confused. What was the performer going to do? Serena closed her eyes, and her clear, powerful voice echoed across the valley. She didn't sing of joy or clarity this time. She sang a song of memory. Of loss. She focused on the beast, reaching past the null's grip, searching for the flicker of the spirit that was trapped inside. She sang of the forest, of hibernation, of caring for its cubs, of the life it once knew. It was a heart-wrenching, beautiful melody of a life stolen. The effect was instantaneous. The hollowed Ursaring stopped its advance. It let out a confused, pained sound, its head twitching. It clutched its head with its massive claws, its vacant eyes flickering as if a light were trying to break through from deep inside. The gray aura around it wavered. Alan watched, stunned into silence. This wasn't a battle. It was an exorcism. Greninja, Ash said, his voice low and focused. Aura Blade. The water kunai on Greninja's hip began to glow, but not with the white light of Cut. It was a brilliant, sapphire blue, infused with Ash's own life force. Greninja blurred forward, not in a wild charge, but in a single, precise, impossibly fast dash. It didn't aim for a vital point. It aimed for the center of the Ursaring's chest, the focal point of the null's energy. The aura blade struck home. There was no explosion, no violent impact. Just a soft chime as the blade made contact. A wave of pure blue light spread from the point of impact, flowing through the Ursaring's body like a dye spreading through water. The sickly gray aura dissolved, replaced by the vibrant blue, which then faded, leaving the Ursaring's normal, healthy brown fur. Its vacant eyes cleared, the milky film receding to reveal the dark, wild eyes of a normal Pokémon. The great bear stumbled, shook its massive head, and looked from the humans to the forest. It gave a low, confused grunt, and then, as if sensing it was out of its depth, turned and lumbered back into the safety of the trees, its spirit its own once more. Silence descended upon the valley. Ash Greninja's form receded, leaving Greninja standing stoically. Alan recalled his Charizard, his hands shaking. He stared at the spot where the Ursaring had been, then at Serena, who was breathing heavily on the ledge, then at Ash, who stood there with an expression not of triumph, but of grim resolve. He finally understood. Ash hadn't gotten weaker. He hadn't been distracted. He had leveled up to a battlefield Alan didn't even know existed. The pursuit of pure strength, the only thing Alan had ever valued, was a child's game compared to what he had just witnessed. Humbled, his pride shattered, Alan walked forward. He stopped before Ash, his gaze finally clear of arrogance, filled only with a dawning, terrifying respect. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That's what we're fighting, Alan," Ash replied, his expression somber. "A war that strength alone can't win." Alan looked at his own hands, at the key stone that had always been the symbol of his power. It felt cold, inert. He looked up at Ash, at the quiet, unshakable strength in his eyes, and at Serena, who was now walking down to join them. He saw their power, a synergy of body and spirit, of fire and song, and he knew he was in the presence of something far beyond his comprehension. His rivalry with Ash was over. It had been rendered obsolete. "I was wrong," Alan said, the words costing him everything and yet feeling liberating. "The power you have, it's not a distraction. It's the only thing that matters, isn't it?" Ash nodded slowly. Alan took a deep breath, his decision made. The path of the strongest was a dead end. But this was a path with purpose. "Then let me help," he said, his voice regaining a fraction of its old intensity, but channeled into a new direction. "I've spent my life mastering power. Let me use it for this. Let me fight with you." Ash looked at Serena, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a firm, decisive nod. They would need every ally they could get. Ash extended his hand to his old rival. "Welcome to the team." Alan took it, his grip firm. The handshake was a treaty. A new alliance forged in the heart of a secret valley. The Guardian and the Queen now had their night. Chapter 4, A City's Song. The return to Lumio City felt like a descent from a sunlit mountain peak into a smog-filled valley. The vibrant life energy of the secret valley was replaced by a thrumming, nervous tension that vibrated in the very pavement. Cashin and the Order of Silence had not been idle. Their initial strategy of framing Ash had been a blunt instrument. Their new approach was surgical, a campaign of 1,000 cuts designed to bleed their credibility dry. They had shifted from direct accusations to a more insidious form of psychological warfare. It started small. An electrical substation on the outskirts of the city would short out, causing a localized blackout. Hours later, the Order would release an anonymous analysis, complete with falsified energy readings, suggesting a wild fluctuation of aura energy was the cause. A flock of fletchling would suddenly become disoriented and fly into windows in a quiet residential district. The Order would quietly circulate a story about a hero trainer's intense training nearby, his uncontrolled emotional energy, frightening the Pokémon. They never mentioned Ash by name anymore. They didn't have to. The attacks were ghosts. There were no hollowed Pokémon, no direct assaults. Just small, inexplicable disasters, followed by Cashin's calm, reasonable voice appearing on podcasts and unsanctioned news streams, offering his interpretation. "We must understand," he would say, his voice a soothing balm of poison, "that great power, even when wielded with the best intentions, has unforeseen consequences. The world is a delicate ecosystem. A single, powerful shout can trigger an avalanche. Is it not better, then, to embrace a world of quiet harmony? He was a master of his craft. He never sounded like a villain. He sounded like a philosopher, a concerned citizen. He was turning Ash's greatest strength, his bond with his Pokémon and his own aura, into a public menace. And the people of Kalos, scared and confused, were starting to listen. The pressure was immense. Ash, Serena, Clement, and Bonnie had set up a makeshift command center in the lower levels of Clement's lab, the walls now covered in maps, timelines, and printouts of Cashin's propaganda. Alan had become their shadow, a silent, imposing presence who acted as both bodyguard and intelligence operative. His network of contacts from his time working with Lysandra, though distasteful, proved surprisingly useful. "He's not using a central broadcast point," Alan reported, pacing the room like a caged Charizard. He had traded his long coat for a more tactical jacket, his focus now razor-sharp and directed at this new, intangible enemy. "The propaganda is spreading through a decentralized network of private servers and encrypted chat rooms. It's a grassroots campaign. By the time we trace one source, 100 more have popped up." Clement, looking more exhausted than ever, pushed his glasses up his nose. "He's a technological ghost. He understands that an idea is harder to fight than an army. We can't just blow up his base. His base is inside people's heads." The toll was most visible on Ash. He was used to tangible threats. He could punch a problem, or have Pikachu use Thunderbolt on it. This was like fighting smoke. He found himself second-guessing his own actions. When he trained with his Pokémon in the park, he kept his aura tightly coiled, worried that any stray fluctuation would be twisted and used against him. The hero who had saved the world a dozen times was being forced to hide his power, to feel ashamed of it. The strain was beginning to show. One evening, after a particularly vicious news report linking a traffic pileup to a sudden wave of empathic distress in the area, Ash slammed his fist on the metal table. "I can't do this," he growled, the frustration boiling over. "How do I fight this? Every time I use my power, even to help, he turns it into a weapon against me. Maybe he's right. Maybe it would be better if I just stopped." The room fell silent. Serena walked over to him, her expression soft but firm. She placed a hand on his clenched fist, her touch gentle but insistent until his fingers uncurled. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Don't you dare let him win. That's what he wants. He wants you to doubt yourself. He wants you to be afraid of your own strength. Your power isn't the problem, Ash. It's the solution. He's just trying to make the world forget that." She squeezed his hand. "We can't outmaneuver his lies. So we have to stop playing his game. We can't fight him in the shadows. We have to bring this into the light." A plan began to form in her mind, bold and incredibly risky. It was a performer's plan, built on instinct, stagecraft, and an unshakable faith in the people. "We're going to throw a concert," she announced. Clement stared at her. "A concert?" "Serena, the city is a powder keg of anxiety and fear. A large public gathering is the last thing we need." "No," Serena countered, her eyes alight with a fire they hadn't seen in days. "It's exactly what we need. His entire strategy is built on fear, apathy, and isolation. We have to remind people what it feels like to be connected. To feel joy. To be part of something bigger than themselves. We're going to hold a free concert, right in the heart of the city. In the central plaza, beneath the Prism Tower. It's a target," Alan stated flatly. "A massive, brightly lit target. He will attack." "I know," Serena said, her gaze unwavering. "I'm counting on it." Ash looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the heavy cloak of doubt begin to lift. He saw the Kalos queen in her element, not just a performer, but a leader. He saw the strategist who had seen the path to victory. "What's the plan?" he asked, a genuine smile returning to his face. "Kashin's power comes from fear and negative emotion," Serena explained, her voice gaining momentum. "He uses it to fuel his hollowed Pokemon. We're going to give him a target so full of positive emotion, of hope and joy and connection, that it acts like a poison to his power. This isn't just a concert. It's a trap. A beacon. A weapon." The plan was audacious. They brought it to Diantha. The champion, whose own authority was being challenged by a nervous and indecisive Kalos government, listened intently. The pressure on her to sideline Ash was immense, but her faith in them, forged at the power plant, had not wavered. "The government will never approve this," Diantha said, studying a map of the city. "It's too much of a security risk." "So don't ask them," Serena replied simply. "As Kalos queen, I have the right to stage a public performance. And as champion, you have the authority to provide security for a public event." A slow, dangerous smile touched Diantha's lips. "A legal loophole. I like it." She tapped the map. "My Elite Four will be here, here, and here, forming a perimeter. We'll present it as a goodwill concert for the unity of Lumios. A direct challenge to Kashin's narrative of division." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Serena's team, masters of logistics and promotion, swung into action. Digital billboards lit up with announcements. The news, hungry for a new story, exploded with coverage. The Song of Lumios was on everyone's lips. Clement and his father worked day and night, not on a weapon, but on a massive, custom-built sound and light system, designed to broadcast Serena's performance with unparalleled clarity. Alan, using his own shadowy expertise, worked with Diantha's security chief to anticipate the Order's tactics, setting up counter-surveillance and plainclothes officers throughout the crowd. Ash's role was the most critical. He was the ace in the hole. He and Pikachu spent the time in quiet meditation, not training, but conserving and focusing their energy, preparing for the inevitable storm. The evening of the concert, the air in Lumio City was electric. The central plaza, which could hold 50,000 people, was overflowing. The crowd was a cross-section of the entire region, families with children, young trainers, elderly couples, even business people who had left work early. They were drawn by curiosity, by Serena's fame, but also by a desperate, unspoken need for a reprieve from the anxiety that had gripped the city. Backstage, in a temporary tent, the mood was tense. "All teams are in position," Diantha's voice crackled over the comms unit on Clement's wrist. "Elite Four members Malva, Siebold, Wickstrom, and Drasna are covering the perimeter choke points. Alan is on overwatch from the roof of the building opposite. No sign of any overt hostiles, but the background chatter on their networks is expectant." Serena took a deep breath, adjusting the small, wireless microphone near her lips. She was dressed in a stunning, shimmering silver outfit that seemed to capture and reflect the light. She looked every inch the queen. But her eyes were fixed on Ash. He walked over to her, taking her hands in his. They were steady. "You ready for this?" he asked softly. "I was born for this," she replied, a confident smile playing on her lips. But he saw the flicker of nervousness in her eyes. "Just, try not to let your part of the show be too destructive. Clement's new sound system is expensive." He grinned. "No promises." He leaned in and gave her a quick, firm kiss. "Go remind them how to sing." She nodded, squeezed his hand one last time, and walked towards the stage. As Serena stepped into the spotlight, a roar went up from the crowd, a wave of pure adoration. She stood there for a moment, basking in it, her presence commanding and absolute. The noise faded to a hush as she raised a hand. "Lumios," she said, her voice ringing out through the plaza, clear and strong. "They say our city is afraid. They say we are divided. They say we have forgotten how to feel joy. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I say they are wrong. The crowd roared its agreement. Tonight, she declared, we are not going to be quiet. We are not going to be afraid. Tonight, we are going to be loud. Tonight, we sing. The music kicked in, a powerful, uplifting anthem. And Serena began to perform. It was more than a concert. It was a masterpiece of emotional engineering. She started with songs of joy and celebration, infectious melodies that had the entire crowd dancing and singing along. The plaza, which had been a place of fear just weeks ago, was transformed into a beacon of pure, unadulterated happiness. The positive energy was a tangible thing, a palpable warmth that pushed back against the city's chill. From his vantage point on a nearby rooftop, peering through a pair of high-powered binoculars, Alan felt it too. It was a strange, unfamiliar sensation. He watched the crowd, a sea of smiling, cheering faces, and felt a flicker of something he could only describe as hope. Then he saw it. At the edges of the crowd, in the darker alleyways and side streets just beyond the reach of the stage lights, they appeared. Figures in dark, unobtrusive clothing. They weren't fighting. They were just, standing there. And as they did, the people near them began to stumble. The smiles on their faces faltered, replaced by confusion, then fear. They're here, Alan's voice crackled over the comms. West perimeter. North entrance. They're not attacking. They're acting as emotional dampeners. Using the fear of the people on the fringes to create a counterwave. On stage, Serena felt it. A cold undercurrent beneath the warm tide of the crowd's joy. The resistance she had felt before, now amplified. She faltered for a half-second, her voice catching. She met Ash's eyes, who was watching from the wings. He gave her a sharp, determined nod. Push through. She took a deep breath and changed tactics. The music softened. The tempo slowed. She moved into a ballad, a song of struggle, of overcoming hardship, of finding light in the darkness. Her voice took on a new quality, not just of joy, but of resilience. She was acknowledging the fear, the darkness, but refusing to surrender to it. She was telling a story, their story, and the crowd was listening, their hearts hanging on every note. The order of silence made their move. From the shadows where they had been seeding fear, the hollowed Pokemon emerged. Not one or two, but dozens. Rhyhorn, Scyther, Houndoom, all with the same vacant eyes and gray, light-draining auras. They began to move into the crowd, their mere presence a weapon, turning the edges of the celebration into a panic. Engage. Diantha's voice commanded over the comms. The Elite Four struck. Malva's Mega Houndoom unleashed torrents of fire. Seabold's Mega Blastoise created barriers of water. Wickstrom's Mega Scizor was a blur of steel, and Drasna's dragons descended from the sky. They were brilliant, powerful, holding the line, preventing the hollows from reaching the main body of the crowd. But the hollows were not trying to break through. They were a diversion. The real attack came from below. A massive, hollowed onyx erupted from the street directly in front of the stage, shattering the pavement. Its eyes were two vast, milky voids. Its gray aura was so powerful it caused the stage lights to flicker and die, plunging the plaza into a terrifying semi-darkness, lit only by the fires of the distant battles and the glow of the Prism Tower. The crowd screamed, a wave of pure terror that was like a feast for the creature. It reared back, its head silhouetted against the tower, ready to bring it crashing down onto the stage, onto Serena. But Serena wasn't screaming. She hadn't even stopped singing. Her voice, now amplified only by the raw power of her own spirit, cut through the chaos, a single, unwavering note of defiance. And in that moment of absolute terror, a new light appeared. A golden bolt of lightning shot from the side of the stage, striking the onyx squarely in the face. Pikachu, Volt Tackle. Ash roared, his voice amplified by a power of its own. Pikachu, a meteor of electrical fury, slammed into the Onyx's head, not to do damage, but to get its attention. The massive rock snake turned its vacant gaze towards the new threat. Ash leaped onto the broken stage, Greninja landing silently beside him. They didn't need the grand transformation. Their bond was already at its peak. "This is what you wanted, isn't it, Kashin?" Ash yelled into the darkness, knowing he was being watched. "You wanted to show everyone my power. You wanted them to be afraid of it. Well, here it is." He held out his hands, and a sphere of brilliant, blindingly pure aura formed between them. It was not the gentle pulse from the power plant. This was a concentrated star, a sun of life energy. All the hope, all the joy, all the defiant spirit of the 50,000 people in the plaza, channeled through Serena's song, was being focused by Ash into a single point. The hollowed onyx felt it, the thing it was made to destroy, the source of all the world's noise and pain. It opened its massive maw and charged, intending to swallow the light whole. From his rooftop, Alan watched, breathless. This wasn't just a battle. It was a statement. "Everyone, watch." Alan yelled into his comms, patching it through Clement's system to the jumbotrons around the plaza that had gone dark. Clement, from his lab, frantically rerouted power, bringing the screens to life. They didn't show the chaos. They showed Ash. The entire city saw him, standing there, a lone figure holding a star, facing down a monster born of darkness. They saw Serena, standing behind him, her voice never wavering, a queen guarding her king. "Now, Pikachu!" Ash bellowed. From its perch on the Onyx's head, Pikachu unleashed the most powerful thunderbolt of its life, not at the Onyx, but straight up, a golden spear of lightning aimed at the sky. The bolt struck the tip of the prism tower. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the entire tower, a marvel of Clementic engineering, responded. It was designed to receive and transmit energy. The entire spire lit up, acting as a massive antenna, a giant tuning fork. It captured the raw, positive energy of Serena's song and the crowd's defiant hope, and focused it, channeling it down into Ash. The sphere of aura in his hands exploded in size, no longer a star, but a supernova. "This is my power." Ash roared, his voice booming across the plaza, imbued with the energy of the city itself. "This is our power. And it is not something to fear." He thrust his hands forward, unleashing the wave. It was a tsunami of light. Of life. Of song. It struck the Onyx, and the creature of rock and silence didn't even have time to roar. It simply dissolved. The null energy was annihilated, the spirit within cleansed and released in a single, silent instant. The wave continued outward, washing over the plaza. It passed through the crowd, not with force, but with a feeling of profound warmth and peace. It passed over the battling hollowed Pokémon, and one by one, they stumbled, the gray auras vanishing, their eyes clearing as they woke from their nightmare. The light reached the edges of the city, and the dark-clad members of the Order of Silence recoiled as if burned, clutching their heads and retreating into the shadows from which they came. The wave of aura ascended, washing over the prism tower itself, a final, brilliant pulse that lit up the night sky, visible for 100 miles. A declaration. In the aftermath, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, a single person began to clap. Then another. And another. Until the entire plaza, all 50,000 people, erupted in a roar of cheers, applause, and relieved tears, a sound 100 times more powerful than any stadium victory. They weren't cheering for a trainer who had won a battle. They were cheering for their hero, who had stood in the darkness and held up a light. They were cheering for their queen, whose song had given them the strength to hope. They hadn't just won the battle. They had won back the city's heart. In a darkened room, miles away, Kashin watched the scene on a dozen monitors. His calm, serene expression was gone, replaced by a tight, bloodless line for a mouth. He had offered the world peace, silence, an end to suffering. And they had thrown it back in his face, choosing instead their loud, chaotic, painful emotions. He had underestimated the power of their song. He would not make that mistake again. He turned away from the monitors, towards a large, steel door at the back of the room. It was time to escalate. It was time to introduce them to a silence they couldn't sing their way out of. It was time to summon the Herald. Chapter 5, The Herald at the Gates. The victory in Lumio City was a turning point. The public's fear, so carefully cultivated by Kashin, had been transformed into defiant adoration. Ash was no longer a suspected anomaly, he was the guardian of Lumios, his name chanted in the streets. Serena was more than a queen, she was the voice of Kalos itself. The Song of Lumios had become a regional anthem, a symbol of hope that echoed from cafes, radios, and the lips of children. For a week, the region breathed a collective sigh of relief. The cold spots vanished. There were no more reports of hollowed Pokémon. It felt as if the war was over. Ash knew better. So did Serena, Alan, and Diantha. It was a reprieve, not a peace treaty. He's gone to ground, Alan reported during a strategy meeting in Diantha's office, which had become their new official headquarters. All of the Order's network activity has ceased. Their safe houses are empty. It's like they vanished off the face of the earth. A predator doesn't vanish, it retreats to find a bigger gun, Diantha observed, her gaze fixed on a map of the Kalos region. He's not giving up. He's doubling down. Ash stood by the window, looking out at the city now bustling with renewed life. He felt the hum of the city's aura, bright and strong. But at the very edge of his perception, far to the east, he felt a wrongness. A pinprick of cold that was growing, a festering wound in the world's life force. There, he said, pointing towards the craggy, desolate landscape of the Terminus Cave and the ruins beyond, an area forever scarred by the battle against the giant rock. A place of great tragedy. Something's happening there. He didn't know how right he was. In the shadow of the petrified giant rock, within a cavern stained with the lingering negative energy of Lyssandra's ultimate weapon, Kashin had gathered the last of his true believers. There were no more than 50 of them, their faces etched with a fanatical devotion that transcended the failure in Lumios. They knelt in a circle, their heads bowed. Kashin stood in the center, no longer the calm, charismatic philosopher. His robes were gone, replaced by simple, stark black garments. His hair was disheveled, his eyes burned with a cold, terrifying fire. He had offered the world a gentle release. They had answered with a song of defiance. He would not offer them a choice again. The world is a sick, feverish child, thrashing in the pain of its own existence, he intoned, his voice echoing off the cavern walls. It was not a speech for the masses, but a liturgy for the damned. We offered it a soothing balm, and it mistook our mercy for weakness. It clings to its pain, its noise, its chaotic song, because it does not know the profound peace of silence. He raised his arms. The great entity, the blessed quiet of Malakbel, has shown me the final truth. This world does not need to be convinced. It needs to be cured. And the cure must be absolute. He held up a shard of dark, twisted metal, a fragment of the ultimate weapon that had been used to power the giant rock, pulsing with a malevolent, life-draining energy. Malakbel requires a gateway. A sacrifice. A demonstration of our commitment to the great and final peace. He looked at his followers, his eyes filled with a terrifying, ecstatic light. Our shallow emotions are a price worth paying for the world's tranquility. Our fleeting lives are a small sacrifice for an eternity of silence. His followers looked up at him, their faces masks of blissful acceptance. They had been chosen. They would be the architects of the new, quiet world. Kashin plunged the dark shard into the heart of the circle. A web of black energy, cold and dead, shot out from it, connecting to each of the kneeling acolytes. They gasped, but did not cry out. The color drained from their faces, the life from their eyes. They did not die, they were unwritten. Their life force, their emotions, their very essence was drawn out, siphoned into the shard, which began to glow with a light that was the color of a star collapsing. Cashin stood in the center of this spiritual vortex, his own life force being drained away, his body racked with a pain that would have shattered any other man. But he embraced it, welcomed it. It was the price of ascension. "Hear me, herald of the void," he screamed, his voice no longer human, but a chorus of stolen whispers. "I have paid the tithe of life. I have offered the sacrifice of soul. The gateway is open. Come forth and bring the silence." The shard of metal shattered, and the energy it contained, the sum total of 50 lives and Cashin's own fanatical will, imploded, not with a bang, but with a sickening, silent rush of anti-sound. For a single instant, a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, a hole in reality itself, hung in the air. And from that hole, something stepped out. The first sign was the sound. Or the lack of it. From their perch in the mountains, a team of Pokémon Rangers monitoring seismic activity around the Terminus Cave suddenly found their equipment silent. The chirping of the native Zubat, the drip of water, the very hum of the earth, all of it just stopped. An unnatural quiet fell, so profound it was painful. Then came the visual. The lead ranger, looking through her binoculars, gasped and dropped them. Where a verdant, though rugged, canyon had been moments before, there was now a creeping wave of gray. The hardy mountain grasses and shrubs were turning to ash and brittle stone, not burning, but having their life and color leached away in an instant. A stream that trickled down the rock face turned to a black, stagnant sludge before evaporating into nothing. And at the center of the spreading desolation walked a figure of impossible, nightmarish beauty. It had the form of Xerneas, the legendary bringer of life. The elegant, branching horns were there, the graceful, deer-like body. But it was a blasphemous mockery. Its hide, once a regal midnight blue, was the color of bleached bone. Its legs, instead of ending in hooves, seemed to dissolve into wisps of shadow that left cracks of dead earth in their wake. And its horns, where multifaceted gems of every color once glowed with the promise of eternal life, were now jagged spurs of obsidian black, dripping a thick, oily nothingness that extinguished the very air it touched. Its eyes were not empty voids, but twin black holes, drawing in the light and giving nothing back. This was not Xerneas. This was its inversion. Its shadow. The herald of silence. It took a step, and a 10-foot radius of land around it died. It took another, and an ancient tree turned to gray dust and blew away on a wind that made no sound. It was not rampaging. It was not angry. It was simply walking, and its very presence was an act of total annihilation. It was a cancer on the face of the world. The ranger's panicked call reached Diantha's office within minutes. When Clement put the satellite imagery on the main screen, a collective gasp went through the room. They watched in horror as the gray wasteland expanded in real time, a stain spreading across the map of Kalos, originating from the site Ash had indicated. "It's heading west," Alan said, his voice tight, his strategic mind cutting through the horror. "Directly towards the farmlands of Bas de Mer Ranch. Towards the coast." "The heartland," Diantha whispered, her face pale. "The breadbasket of Kalos. If it reaches there," she didn't need to finish. "It would be a blow the region could not recover from." A frantic buzzing came from Bonnie's bag, which she now carried everywhere. She opened it, and the green hexagonal form of Zygarde Core, squishy, projected a holographic image of itself onto the table. Its single eye was blinking in alarm. "The land cries out." Squishy's telepathic voice filled their minds, no longer the cute, curious tone Bonnie knew, but a deep, ancient, and terrified rumble. "A wound has been opened. The balance is broken. Order is being unmade." Bonnie looked at Ash, her young face filled with a fear that broke his heart. "What is that thing, Ash?" He looked at the creature on the screen, the twisted parody of the life-giver he had once met. "That's what Cashin summoned," he said, his voice grim. That's his answer to our song. He felt a cold dread mix with a burning rage. Cashin hadn't just escalated. He had committed an atrocity. There was no more time for strategy meetings or quiet training. This was a 5-alarm fire. We have to stop it, Diantha declared, her voice regaining its steel. Now. Before it gets any further. She looked around the room, at the small band of heroes who were now Kalos's only hope. This is it. We mobilize everything we have. We will hold the line at the Azure Highlands, here. She pointed to a ridge of mountains that formed a natural bottleneck on the Herald's path. If we can't stop it there, we won't be able to stop it at all. The mobilization was swift and desperate. Diantha put out a priority alpha call to the entire Kalos League. Every gym leader, every elite trainer, every ranger on the continent was to converge on the Azure Highlands. It was a call to war. Alan was tasked with coordinating the aerial assault, a desperate gamble with flying Pokémon against a creature that seemed to drain life from the air itself. Clement worked feverishly to analyze the energy readings, searching for any weakness, any pattern, however small. Ash and Serena flew ahead on Ash's Charizard, the wind whipping past them. They needed to see it for themselves. From 1,000 feet up, the scar on the landscape was breathtakingly horrific. It was a perfect line of death, a creeping frontier of gray against the vibrant green of the region. And in the center of it, the Herald walked, its pace unhurried, inexorable. Serena gripped Ash's shoulders tightly. How can one thing contain so much, nothing? She whispered, her empathic senses overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing void below. Ash didn't answer. He was reaching out with his aura, trying to get a feel for the enemy. It was like putting his hand into a black hole. There was no anger, no malice, no hatred to latch onto. Just a bottomless, soul-crushing pull towards utter non-existence. It was pure entropy given form. By the time they landed at the rendezvous point in the Azure Highlands, the first wave of defenders had arrived. Elite Four members stood alongside gym leaders, Corina with her Mega Lucario, Valerie with her Sylveon, Ramos with his Gogoat. They were the best of the best, their faces grim but resolute. "What are your orders, champion?" Wickstrom asked, his voice ringing with chivalric duty. Diantha, having just arrived, looked to Ash. This was his battlefield now. He was the expert on this impossible enemy. Ash surveyed the terrain. The Herald would have to come through a wide, rocky pass. We can't attack it head-on. Raw energy makes it stronger. We saw that with Alan's Charizard. We need to disrupt it, not destroy it. He looked at Serena. Your song weakened it before. It found the spirit inside. Then I will sing until my voice breaks, she said, her expression fierce. We need a delivery system, Clement chimed in, having just arrived in a custom-built mobile command vehicle. He gestured to a set of large, dish-like speakers on the roof. My sonic amplifiers. They can project Serena's voice over the entire pass. But they'll need time to calibrate, and they'll need protection. The plan was set, a desperate symphony of their combined strengths. Phase 1, Serena's song, broadcast at full power, to weaken the Herald's hold on the spirit within. Phase 2, a coordinated, multi-pronged assault from the gym leaders and Elite Four, not with raw power, but with tactical, status-affecting moves, ice to slow it, grass to bind it, anything to create an opening. Phase 3, Ash, Alan, and their mega-evolved partners would be the spearhead, delivering the final, purifying blow. They didn't have to wait long. The silence preceded it. The ambient chatter of the assembled Pokémon died. The wind stilled. And then, the Herald of Silence appeared at the far end of the pass. It paused, its black hole eyes seeming to survey the line of defenders. It showed no reaction. It simply began to walk forward. Now, Serena! Ash yelled. Serena, standing on the roof of Clement's vehicle, took a deep breath and began to sing. The melody, amplified 1,000-fold, washed over the valley. It was the song of memory, the one she had used on the Ursaring, but stronger, more desperate, infused with all the hope of the assembled army. The herald faltered. For the first time, it reacted. It let out a silent scream, a wave of pure null energy that caused the rocks around it to crack and crumble. The song was hurting it. It was working. Phase 2. Go. Diantha commanded. The battlefield erupted. Corina and her Lucario, moving as one, unleashed a barrage of aura spheres, not at the herald, but around it, trying to cage it in its own life force. Ramos's Gogoat sent out a forest of vines, tangling its legs. Valerie's fairy Pokémon created a whirlwind of disorienting light. It was a brilliant, coordinated attack of disruption. The herald lashed out. It swung its head, and one of the black, jagged horns grazed the earth. A fissure of dead, gray rock shot across the battlefield, forcing the attackers to scatter. It was impossibly fast, impossibly powerful. It's adapting. Alan yelled from the air, his Charizard dodging a whip of shadow energy. The song is making it angry. The herald's form began to shimmer. The bone-white hide cracked, revealing a core of swirling, stellar darkness beneath. It was shedding its stolen form, revealing the true power of the null within. It raised its head and unleashed a focused beam of pure nothingness from its mouth. The beam struck Ramos's lead Gogoat. The sturdy grass-type didn't cry out. It didn't faint. It just ceased to be. One moment it was there, the next it was a puff of gray dust that settled on the dead ground. A wave of horror and shock rippled through the defenders. This was not a Pokémon battle. This was extermination. We can't hold it. Drasna cried out, her powerful dragon struggling to even get near the beast. In the midst of the chaos, a new power entered the fray. The ground itself began to tremble. From the earth behind the defenders, a colossal green hand erupted, followed by another. The land itself was rising up, coalescing. Zygarde, spurred by the direct threat to the ecosystem, was gathering its cells. It grew, its form shifting from the 10% canine to the 50% serpent, and then beyond. With a roar that was the voice of the planet, it took its final, 100% for me, a giant of green and black, a living immune system for the world, its chest emblazoned with the colors of the Kalosian flag. The order must be preserved. Zygarde's voice boomed in their minds as it strode forward to meet the herald. The two titans clashed. A god of life and order against an avatar of death and nothingness. Their battle was on a scale that dwarfed everything else. Mountainsides crumbled. The sky tore open. Zygarde's dragon pulses were swallowed by the herald's aura. The herald's null beams were deflected by Zygarde's sheer physical form. It was a stalemate, but a stalemate that was destroying the land they fought over. We have our opening. Ash yelled. Zygarde can't beat it, but it can hold it. Alan, now. He and Alan locked eyes. They activated their keystones in unison. Mega Charizard X and Ash Greninja stood ready, glowing with power. Serena's song changed. She poured all her love for Ash, all her belief in him, into the melody, a focused beam of pure, empowering energy aimed only at him. Ash felt it like a fire in his soul. The bond with Greninja flared brighter than ever before. The water shuriken on its back grew, spinning with a furious, golden light, the combination of water, his aura, and Serena's song. We end this now. Ash roared. Let's go. He, Alan, and their partners charged, a three-pronged spear aimed at the heart of the monster, using the titanic battle between Zygarde and the Herald as cover. They weaved through blasts of energy that could unmake reality, their focus absolute. They reached the beast. Alan and Charizard went high, unleashing a full-power dragon claw aimed at the Herald's head to draw its attention. Ash and Greninja went low, sliding under its guard. Now. Giga Water Shuriken. Ash bellowed, putting every ounce of his will, his hope, his vow, into the attack. Greninja leaped, grabbing the massive, sun-gold shuriken from its back and hurled it. The shuriken struck the herald dead center in its chest, where its stolen heart should be. For a moment, it seemed to do nothing. Then, a brilliant golden light erupted from the point of impact. It was the light of life, of song, of connection, a direct antidote to the null. The herald screamed, a sound that was finally audible, a shriek of pure agony as the life-giving energy warred with the void inside it. The bone-white armor cracked and shattered. The obsidian horns crumbled to dust. The stolen form of Xerneas disintegrated, revealing the core of swirling, malevolent darkness. The golden shuriken had pierced it, creating a fissure, a weakness. With a final, desperate roar, the dark core imploded, retreating from this world, back through the hole from which it came. It was not destroyed. It was wounded. It had been repelled. Silence, a true and natural silence, fell over the battlefield. The defenders stood, battered, bruised, their ranks thinned. Zygarde, its duty done for now, began to dissolve back into its component cells. They looked at the pass. They had held the line. But the cost was staggering. The Azure Highlands were now a barren, lifeless wasteland, a permanent, gray scar on the face of Kalos. Ash stood, panting, the bond with Greninja receding, leaving him feeling hollow and drained. Serena rushed to his side, her song finished, her face pale with exhaustion. They had survived. They had won the battle. But as he looked at the devastation, at the dead land where a mighty Gogoat had once stood, Ash knew this wasn't a victory. They hadn't defeated the Herald. They had just made it angry. And they now knew the terrifying truth of the power they were up against. They had stared into the void, and for the first time, the void had bled. Chapter 6, The Heart of the Hollow. The aftermath of the battle in the Azure Highlands was a somber affair. There were no victory parades, no triumphant speeches. There was only the grim task of counting the cost. The grey wasteland, a permanent, silent testament to the Herald's power, stretched for miles. The loss of gym leader Ramos's Gogoat had sent a shockwave of grief and fear through the ranks of the Kalos League. They had faced a threat that didn't just defeat Pokémon, it erased them. The taste of victory was as bitter as ash. In Clement's mobile command center, parked on the edge of the dead zone, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion and frustration. The remnants of their alliance were gathered, their faces drawn and weary. It retreated, but it wasn't destroyed, Diantha stated, her voice heavy. She traced a line on a holographic map. The null energy signature is gone, but the rift Kashin created to summon it, it's still there. A faint, festering wound near the giant rock. It's only a matter of time before it recovers and tries again. Clement, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, pointed to a complex energy diagram on another screen. It was a recording of the final moments of the battle, a chaotic symphony of data spikes. There's something here, he said, zooming in on the golden explosion of Ash's giga-water shuriken. When the Herald's form disintegrated, its energy signature fractured. For a split second, I detected two distinct patterns. The primary one was the null, cold, entropic, absolute nothingness. But there was another, underneath it. Faint, erratic, but undeniably alive. He isolated the secondary signature, and a new waveform appeared on the screen, a flickering, panicked heartbeat of light. It's a match, Clement whispered, his eyes wide. It's a perfect match for the energy signature of a healthy Xerneas. The implication settled over the room like a shroud. It wasn't a clone or a magical construct, Serena breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. That was Xerneas. Trapped. Corrupted. The horror of their fight took on a new, sickening dimension. They hadn't been fighting a monster, they had been fighting a prisoner forced to be its own cage. The Herald was not the enemy. It was the first victim. The song, Serena realized aloud. That's why it worked. I wasn't just disrupting the null energy. I was reaching the real Xerneas, trapped inside. I was reminding it of what it was. Ash clenched his fist. The image of the herald's agonizing, audible scream as his attack struck home replayed in his mind. He hadn't been landing a finishing blow. He had been torturing a legendary Pokémon they were supposed to protect. So our mission changes, he said, his voice low and hard, cutting through the horrified silence. His purpose, which had been clouded by the brutality of the last battle, was now crystal clear. We're not going on the defensive anymore. We're not waiting for it to come to us. We're going on the offensive. But we're not going to destroy the Herald. We're going to liberate it. A rescue mission. Alan scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual cynicism. It was tinged with disbelief. Ash, we barely survived fighting that thing when it was at half power. How are we supposed to get close enough to perform some kind of spiritual surgery? By cutting off the source of the infection, Ash countered, his eyes fixed on the map. Cashin. He's controlling it. Clement's analysis shows a faint but constant stream of energy flowing from the rift site to the Herald, like a leash. He's the puppet master. We take him out, we break his control over Xerneas. He'll be expecting an assault, Diantha warned. He's established his base within the dead zone. The area is saturated with null energy. Conventional forces would be useless before they even got close. Their morale, their very life force, would be drained. So we don't send a conventional force, Serena said, stepping to Ash's side, their thoughts moving in perfect sync. The null energy feeds on emotion. Fear, anger, even the fighting spirit of an army. But what if we sent something it couldn't detect? She looked at Ash, a plan forming in her gaze. Our vow at the sundial. It created a resonance, a perfect harmony between us. We can use that. I can project a field of absolute calm, of emotional neutrality. A bubble of quiet for us to move in. They'll be looking for a charging army. We'll be a whisper in the wind. It was an insane, high-risk infiltration mission. Just the two of them, walking into the heart of the enemy's fortress, a place where the very air was poison. Absolutely not, Alan said immediately. I'm going with you. No, Ash said, his tone leaving no room for argument. We need you and Diantha here. You're the diversion. You're going to make a lot of noise. A big, obvious feint attack on the western edge of the dead zone. Draw his attention, make him think we're trying the same brute force strategy again. It's the only way we'll have enough time to reach the rift. The argument was short and fierce, but Ash's logic was undeniable. A large force would be a liability. A small, stealthy one was their only chance. Reluctantly, Alan and Diantha agreed. The fate of Kalos, and of one of its legendary guardians, would rest on the shoulders of two people. The edge of the dead zone was a line drawn by a god. On one side, a living forest. On the other, a silent, grey world of stone and dust. The air was cold, thin, and utterly still. There was no wind, no sound, no life. Ash and Serena stood at the precipice, dressed in dark, practical gear. Greninja stood with Ash, a silent shadow, its senses on high alert. Ready? Ash asked, his voice low. Serena nodded, her expression focused. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't begin to sing. She didn't project joy or hope. She projected nothing. She drew on the perfect, serene harmony of her bond with Ash, creating a field of absolute emotional peace. It was a bubble of pure neutrality, a quiet space in a world of noise. Ash felt it instantly. The oppressive, draining weight of the dead zone, which had been pressing in on him, receded. Inside Serena's bubble, the air was still cold, but it was no longer hostile. It's working, he whispered in awe. They stepped across the line, into the grey wasteland. They moved quickly and silently through the petrified forest, a landscape of nightmare. The ground crunched under their boots, the only sound in a world devoid of it. Greninja moved ahead, a scout in the grey twilight, its own powerful life force shielded by Serena's calm. As they drew closer to the cavern near the giant rock, they began to see them. Figures in dark robes, standing guard. The remnants of the Order of Silence. They stood unerringly still, their faces pale, their eyes holding a disquieting lack of emotion. They were not hollowed, they were simply empty. Believers who had willingly given up their emotional fire. Serena's field of calm held. The guards' gazes passed right over them, their vacant eyes unable to perceive the two figures moving through their territory. They were emotionally invisible. Suddenly, Greninja held up a hand, stopping them. It pointed towards a ridge overlooking the cavern entrance. A lone figure stood there. But this one was different. This was Cashin. He wasn't looking at them. He was staring out into the distance, towards the west, where a faint flicker of light on the horizon signaled the beginning of Alan and Diantha's diversionary attack. And he was smiling. Then, he turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the grey landscape, and his eyes, no longer kind, but burning with a cold, otherworldly light, locked directly onto them. So, the guardian and his heart come to the heart of the matter, a voice echoed in their minds. It was Cashin's voice, smooth and persuasive, but layered with a cold, cosmic resonance. He hadn't seen them with his eyes. He had felt the hole in the oppressive dread of his domain, the bubble of calm where there should be none. Serena's concentration shattered. The bubble of neutrality collapsed, and the full, crushing weight of the dead zone slammed into them. It was a physical force, a wave of despair and apathy so powerful it brought them to their knees. Cashin was no longer on the ridge. He was standing before them, having moved with impossible speed. He didn't look like a man who had sacrificed his life force. He looked revitalized, powerful, his body surrounded by a faint distortion, the grey haze of the null now clinging to him like a cloak. "Did you really think I wouldn't be prepared for you?" he asked, his telepathic voice dripping with condescending pity. "I have tasted the mind of a god, Ash Ketchum. Your little tricks are an open book." Ash pushed himself to his feet, shielding Serena, who was struggling against the wave of despair. "Let Xerneas go, Cashin," Ash snarled, his own anger a stark contrast to the emptiness around them. "Let it go." Cashin tilted his head, a gesture of mock curiosity. "Why would I do that? I have liberated it. I have freed it from the burden of life, the agony of creation. It is the first citizen of my new, peaceful world." He raised a hand, and the world around them shifted. They were no longer in the grey wasteland. They were standing in a coliseum in a long-dead empire, watching gladiators fight to the death. The scene shifted, a battlefield from a great war, filled with the cries of the wounded. It shifted again, a hospital room, a family weeping over a lost loved one. Vision after vision of pain, suffering, loss, and heartbreak, all born from the violent, chaotic emotions of life, love, and desire. "This is the world you fight to protect," Cashin's voice boomed, filled with a righteous sorrow. "A world of endless, pointless suffering. I am not its destroyer. I am its savior. The great silence is not a punishment. It is a mercy." The psychic assault was overwhelming. The sheer weight of all the world's pain crashed down on Ash. For a split second, he saw the logic. He felt the appeal of a world without grief, without loss. "He's wrong," a voice, small but fierce, cut through the illusion. Serena was on her feet, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "Pain is the price we pay for love, Cashin. Grief is the proof that we lived. You don't want to save the world. You just want to turn the music off because you're afraid to dance." Cashin's serene mask finally cracked. A flash of irritation, a flicker of an emotion he had supposedly transcended, crossed his face. "You cling to your pain like a child to a broken toy. I will show you the futility of it." He raised his hand, and a tendril of pure null energy, a whip of concentrated nothingness, shot toward Serena. Greninja! Ash yelled. Greninja was a blur, intercepting the attack with a blade of glowing blue aura. The clash was silent but immense. The living energy of aura against the dead energy of the null. Greninja was thrown back, its body smoking, but it had held. Your bond is strong, Cashin conceded, a flicker of academic interest in his eyes. An anomaly. But I am no longer just a man. I am an apostle. I wield the null itself. He opened his arms, and the grey haze around him intensified, coalescing into tangible constructs, shadowy, silent versions of Pokémon, formed from pure entropy. A pack of nullhounds materialized and charged. This was the real fight. Not a battle of philosophy, but of survival. Alan, Diantha. He knows we're here. Ash yelled into his comm, hoping the message would get through. The diversion is over. Proceed to the primary objective. While Ash and Greninja battled the null constructs, a desperate, brutal fight against an enemy that couldn't be beaten, only endured, Serena had a different goal. Her eyes were fixed on the cavern behind Cashin, the source of the power, the prison of Xerneas. She had to get to it. She began to hum, a quiet, desperate melody. She wasn't trying to fight the null. She was trying to call to the prisoner. She focused all her will, all her empathy, into a single, piercing note of hope, a key meant for only one lock. Inside the cavern, at the center of the dark rift, the corrupted heart of Xerneas stirred. It heard the song. It remembered. Cashin felt the shift in his power, the tremor of rebellion from his greatest weapon. He turned on Serena, his face a mask of cold fury. The song ends now. He lunged at her, but Ash was there. He threw himself in front of Serena, taking the full brunt of Cashin's physical charge. It wasn't a normal tackle. It was like being hit by a void. The cold seeped into Ash's bones, his vision graying out, his very spirit feeling like it was being unraveled. But he held. He was the guardian. He was a shield of life. He met Cashin's cold fury with a burning, defiant glare. You will not touch her. The standoff was broken by a roar from the cavern. A brilliant, multicolored light erupted from the entrance, a wave of pure life energy that momentarily pushed back the deadening gray of the wasteland. It was Xerneas, fighting back, fueled by Serena's song. The backlash staggered Cashin, giving Ash the opening he needed. He didn't try to punch him. He didn't try to use an aura sphere. He did the one thing Cashin would never expect. He placed his hand on Cashin's chest, and instead of pushing, he projected. He didn't project power. He projected his own spirit. His love for his Pokémon. His rivalry with Gary. His journey with Misty and Brock. His admiration for Cynthia. His bond with Greninja. The taste of victory. The sting of defeat. The joy of a simple meal with his friends. The quiet pride in watching Serena perform. His vow at the sundial. He showed Cashin everything that Cashin had given up. He flooded the Apostle of Silence with a lifetime of vibrant, chaotic, beautiful noise. Cashin screamed, a real, human scream of agony. He stumbled back, clutching his head, his connection to the null faltering as his own buried, forgotten humanity was dragged, kicking and screaming, to the surface. His philosophical foundation, built on a detached observation of pain, shattered when confronted with the unfiltered, subjective reality of a life fully lived. It's not about the pain, Cashin, Ash said, advancing on him, his eyes blazing with an empathy that was more powerful than any attack. It's about what the pain is for. At that moment, the cavalry arrived. A storm of fire and draconic energy rained down from the sky as Alan and Diantha, aboard their mega-evolved Pokémon, launched their assault. They weren't attacking Cashin. They were attacking the rift itself, trying to disrupt the flow of null energy. Serena seized the opportunity. She ran past the reeling Cashin, into the cavern. The sight within was a desecration. A churning vortex of blackness, the rift, hung in the air. And impaled within it, held by tendrils of shadow, was Xerneas. Or what was left of it. It was a ghostly, translucent figure, its life force almost entirely consumed. But its eyes, now glowing with a faint light, were fixed on her. "Help, me," its voice, a faint whisper, echoed in her mind. A massive null construct, a shadowy centipede, materialized from the rift to defend it. But before it could strike, Greninja was there, its blades a blur of blue, holding the line. Serena didn't hesitate. She ran to the edge of the rift, to the trapped form of the legendary, and she put her hands on its ethereal flank. She closed her eyes and let go of everything else. She sang. It was not a performance. It was not a broadcast. It was a direct, soul-to-soul transfusion of life. She poured her own energy, her memories, her love for Ash, her joy, her sorrow, everything she was, into the dying god. Outside, Cashin watched, his face a maelstrom of confusion and rage. He had been defeated, not by power, but by a concept he had deemed irrelevant. Seeing his grand design being unmade by a simple song, a final, desperate act of devotion snapped him. "If I cannot bring peace to this world," he hissed, his voice raw, "then I will become the silence myself." He threw himself backwards, into the swirling vortex of the rift, merging his own fractured spirit with the raw, cosmic power of the null. Inside, the rift shuddered violently. The null energy flared, and Serena was thrown back. But she had done enough. With a final, shattering cry, Xerneas tore itself free from the black tendrils. Its form, still weak and translucent, flared with a brilliant, life-giving light. The war for the Herald's soul was over. The rescue was a success. But as Cashin's essence was consumed by the void, the rift he had created, no longer stable, began to tear itself open. Chapter 7, The War for the Sundial. The moment Cashin threw himself into the rift, the nature of the battle changed. It was no longer an infiltration or a rescue. It became a fight for survival against a collapsing reality. The rift, a controlled puncture in the fabric of space-time, lost its anchor. It ripped and tore, no longer a doorway but a gaping, screaming mouth, vomiting pure null energy into the world. From the cavern, a wave of absolute blackness billowed out, not like smoke, but like a tide of anti-creation. The grey wasteland of the dead zone was consumed in an instant, and the wave of nothingness began to spread, devouring the living landscape of Kalos at a terrifying speed. Trees, rocks, and earth didn't turn to dust, they were simply erased from existence. Fall back. Everyone, fall back. Diantha's voice roared over the comms, a command laced with a horror she had never known. Her mega Gardevoir created a massive psychic barrier, but it shimmered and cracked, the null wave eating at it like acid. Serena scrambled out of the cavern, helping a weakened, ghostly Xerneas, whose light was the only thing holding the immediate area from being swallowed. Greninja landed beside Ash, its body tense, ready for a fight against an enemy with no physical form. Then, from the heart of the expanding void, a new figure rose. It was Cashin, but it was not. His human form was gone, consumed and reforged. He was now a being of pure null, a humanoid silhouette of deepest black, his features indistinct save for two burning points of cold, white light where his eyes should be. He had become what he worshipped, an avatar of the great silence. "The argument is over," his new voice echoed, not in their minds, but in the sudden absence of all other sound. It was a voice made of pure silence. "There is only the final, perfect peace." With a gesture, the new Cashin entity commanded the null. A portion of the darkness coalesced, reforming into the Herald of Silence. It was no longer a perfect, bone-white copy of Xerneas. It was a twisted, nightmarish beast of shadow and jagged edges, a half-finished sculpture of rage and nothingness, its power raw and uncontrolled. The avatar of silence and his rabbit herald now stood against them, and the world was their weapon. "He's heading for Anistar City," Ash said, his voice grim. His aura sense wasn't just picking up a cold spot anymore, it was screaming in agony as the entire region's life force was being threatened. The sundial. It's the linchpin. If he corrupts it, the null will flood the entire planet. There was no time for a retreat, no time to regroup. This was the final battle. The war for Kalos had become the war for the world, and it would be fought and decided today. Alan, Diantha. Ash yelled, his voice taking on the sharp, unquestionable authority of a general on the battlefield. Rally every trainer you can. We make our stand at Anistar. We cannot let him reach that sundial. The flight to Anistar City was a race against the apocalypse. Looking back from Charizard's back, Ash and Serena could see the black tide of the null consuming the horizon, a relentless, silent tsunami of uncreation. Below them, a panicked exodus was underway as people and Pokémon fled the encroaching darkness. They arrived to a city in chaos. But it was a chaos being brought into order. Gym leaders were everywhere, their voices ringing out, directing evacuations, setting up triage centers. Wulfric was creating massive ice walls to funnel fleeing crowds. Olympia, her eyes glowing with psychic power, was coordinating ranger teams, her prescience giving them precious seconds of warning. And in the center of it all, the great Anistar sundial pulsed with a soft, steady light, a defiant heartbeat against the coming darkness. Their allies were already there. Clement had arrived, his entire laboratory seemingly packed into a fleet of mobile units. He was frantically setting up what looked like a series of massive tuning forks around the sundial. It's a resonance cascade, he yelled as Ash and Serena landed. The sundial is a focal point for the planet's life energy, its aura. If I can amplify its natural frequency, I might be able to create a harmonic barrier. It won't stop the null, but it might slow it down. Bonnie was there too, her face streaked with tears but her expression fierce and determined. She clutched her bag, where Squishy was vibrating with a planetary rage. The land will not yield, the Zygarde Corps' voice thundered. We will make our stand here. The earth itself answered the call. From the ground around Anistar, dozens, then hundreds of green, glowing Zygarde cells emerged, flowing like a river towards Bonnie. They swirled around her, a vortex of green light, coalescing not into the 10% or 50% form, but directly into the colossal, majestic 100% perfect for me. Zygarde rose to its full height, dwarfing the buildings of the city, its chest glowing with the power of life itself. It stood as the city's titanic guardian, its gaze fixed on the approaching darkness. The enemy arrived. The wave of null energy washed up against the outskirts of Anistar, and the battle was joined. Kashan, the avatar of silence, floated at the head of his tide of nothingness, a black hole in human form. At his side, the corrupted herald of silence roared, a soundless blast of pure hatred. Zygarde met the herald head-on. The two titans, the embodiment of the planet's order and the avatar of cosmic chaos, clashed in a battle that shattered the very sky. Zygarde's core enforcer beam, a searing Z of pure life energy, was met by the herald's null beams. The impacts created explosions of silent, warring energies that tore the fabric of the air. Below them, the ground war began. Kashan gestured, and an army of null constructs, shadowy beasts of every shape and size, rose from the encroaching darkness and swarmed towards the city. Hold the line. Diantha's voice cried out. She stood with the entire Kalos Elite Four, a wall of power against the tide. Mega-evolved Pokémon charged, their attacks a brilliant, desperate display against the shadowy horde. Malva's Mega Houndoom bathed the field in fire. Wickstrom's Mega Scizor was a crimson blur of flashing pincers. It was a desperate, brutal defense. Ash, Serena, and Alan stood before the sundial, the last line of defense for the planet's heart. With them was the faint, translucent form of the freed Xerneas, its own life-giving aura a small but potent shield against the encroaching dread. This is it, Alan said, his voice grim. He touched his keystone. For Kalos. For everything, Ash replied. He and Greninja became one, the familiar vortex of water a comforting anchor in the reality-bending chaos. Cashin floated towards them, his movements serene, his power absolute. He ignored the larger battle, his focus entirely on the sundial and the three trainers, and one legendary, who stood in his way. The Guardian. The Queen. The misguided knight. And the broken god, his silent voice mocked them. A fittingly tragic honor guard for a dying world. This world isn't dying today, Cashin. Ash roared back. The final confrontation began. It was a symphony of ultimate power. Mega Charizard X's Flare Blitz was a blue comet against the endless night of Cashin's form. Ash Greninja was a phantom of water and aura, its movements so fast it seemed to be in multiple places at once. Serena was not singing for a crowd or for a single Pokémon. She was singing for the sundial itself, her voice a targeted stream of pure life energy, feeding it, reinforcing Clement's harmonic barrier which was now glowing, a fragile dome of light over the city center. Xernea's, though weak, added its own power, its geomancy causing flowers and glowing vines to erupt from the stone around the sundial, a small, defiant garden in the face of oblivion. The battle was a blur of motion and energy. Ash, Serena, and Elan fought with a synergy born of desperation and trust. Elan would force Cashin onto the defensive with overwhelming power, creating an opening for Ash and Greninja to strike with a precise, aura-infused blow. Serena's song was their lifeline, a constant stream of energy that healed their wounds, sharpened their minds, and kept the soul-crushing despair of the Null at bay. Cashin was a god. He didn't block their attacks, he simply unmade them. Charizard's fire would dissipate inches from his body. Greninja's water shurikens would dissolve into mist. He wielded nothingness like a sword and a shield, and he could not be touched. He retaliated, not with crude force, but with surgical precision. He pointed a finger, and the ground beneath Elan crumbled into nothing, forcing Charizard to grab its trainer from a fatal fall. He gestured, and Serena's voice was momentarily silenced, the harmonic barrier flickering violently until she fought through the psychic pressure and began to sing again. "We can't hurt him." Elan yelled, his frustration palpable. "It's like fighting a hole in the universe. Then we don't fight the hole." Ash yelled back, his mind racing, processing 1,000 possibilities a second. "We have to overload it. He's an anchor for the Null, but he's still tied to the man he was. We have to hit him with more life, more energy, than his new form can process." It was a wild, desperate gamble. Ash looked to Serena, a silent question in his eyes. She met his gaze and nodded, her expression one of absolute, unwavering faith. She knew what he was about to ask. She began to pour every last ounce of her strength, her spirit, her very life force, into her song. The harmonic barrier around the sundial shattered, not from an attack, but because Clement was now redirecting all of its focused energy, not as a shield, but into a single, focal point, Ash. Ash held out his hand, and Pikachu, who had been fighting alongside the Elite Four, leaped onto his shoulder, its cheeks crackling with an impossible amount of electricity. "Elan. I need everything you have. Aim for me." Ash commanded. Elan stared at him, madness in his eyes. "Ash, what are you? Trust me." Ash roared. Elan hesitated for only a second, then nodded, a grim look of understanding on his face. "Charizard, give him it all. Blast burn." This was it. The final gambit. Ash stood before the sundial, a nexus of unimaginable power. Serena's song, the lifeblood of the planet channeled through the sundial, and the raw, untamed power of his oldest friend and his greatest rival, all focused on him. He raised his hands, and the world became a storm of energy. A torrent of golden-white life energy from the sundial flowed into him. Pikachu unleashed a volt tackle that wasn't a physical attack but a direct transfusion of its entire electrical charge into Ash's aura. From above, Mega Charizard X unleashed its ultimate fire attack, a pillar of blue flame that did not strike Ash, but was drawn into the swirling vortex of power around him. Ash screamed, not in pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming rush of power. His body was a conduit for the combined hope of the entire world. His aura exploded, no longer blue, but a blinding, pure white, the color of creation itself. Kashin, for the first time, showed something akin to fear. The avatar of silence felt the approach of a sound so loud it could shatter universes. "This changes nothing," his silent voice screamed. "You are just one life. You cannot hold back the tide of infinity. I'm not just one life." Ash yelled back, his voice now a chorus of a million voices, his Pokémon, his friends, his family, the people of Kalos, the very planet itself. "I am all of them." He thrust his hands forward and unleashed the ultimate attack. It was not a beam or a wave. It was a big bang in miniature. A blast of pure, concentrated, weaponized life. The attack struck Kashin. The avatar of silence did not scream. It did not explode. The white light of creation washed over the black silhouette of the void, and for a single, timeless moment, the two absolutes were at war. Then, the silence broke. Kashin's form dissolved, not into nothingness, but into light. The cold, white points of his eyes softened, and for a fleeting instant, Ash saw the face of the man he had been, an expression of profound, peaceful surprise on his lips, as if he had finally heard a song more beautiful than silence. Then he was gone. The effect was cataclysmic. With its anchor destroyed, the null energy Kashin commanded went wild. The corrupted herald let out a final, agonizing shriek and disintegrated into motes of shadow. The army of null constructs vanished. But the main rift, the great tear in reality that Kashin had used to summon his power, did not close. With the destruction of its master, it shattered. The stable tear became an unstable, gaping vortex, a permanent, black wound in the sky above Anistar City, no longer channeling the null, but threatening to suck the world into it. The battle was over. The villain was defeated. But the war was lost. Chapter 8, The silence and the song. The roar of battle faded. The clash of titans ceased. The desperate cries of trainers and Pokémon died away. They were replaced by a silence more profound and terrifying than any Kashin could have engineered. It was the silence of a held breath, the quiet of a world staring into its own grave. Above Anistar City, where the sky should have been, there was now a hole. It wasn't a storm cloud or a shadow, it was a perfect, non-reflective circle of black, a wound in the firmament that did not rage but simply was. The light of the sun bent around its edges, creating a horrifying corona. It was the stable gateway to the domain of Malakbel, a direct line to the heart of cosmic entropy. The effects began immediately. The vibrant colors of Anistar City began to desaturate, as if a celestial artist were slowly turning down the world's contrast. The triumphant cheers of the defenders died in their throats, replaced by a sudden, inexplicable exhaustion. A Pokémon Ranger's Vivillon, its wings a kaleidoscope of patterns, fluttered weakly and then simply faded, its wing beats turning to whispers of dust on a wind that did not blow. It wasn't hollowed. It was being unwritten from existence. The null was no longer a tide to be fought back. It was the new fundamental law of the area, and it was spreading. On the ground, near the sundial, Ash collapsed to one knee, the impossible power that had flowed through him receding, leaving an ache that was more than bone deep. It was soul deep. Serena was at his side in an instant, her arms around him, her own strength nearly spent. "Ash, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she watched a flower from Xerneas's defiant garden wither and turn to grey powder. Kashin was just the gatekeeper, Ash said, his voice raspy. He looked up at the void in the sky, his aura sense giving him a perspective no one else had. He could feel it. The slow, inexorable pull of a drain with no bottom. "We just opened the floodgates." Alan and Diantha landed nearby, their mega evolutions gone, their faces etched with a dawning, soul-crushing despair. "Our attacks, they just passed through it," Diantha said, her voice hollow. It's not there. It's an absence of, there. Zigard, the mighty guardian of the planet, let out a low, mournful rumble that echoed in their minds. The balance is broken. Order unravels. This is the end of the song. The end of the song. The final, great silence. This was it. The apocalypse foretold in Sycamore's dusty book. They had fought the acolytes, the herald, the avatar. They had won every battle. And all it had done was lead them to an unwinnable war. Ash looked at the faces of his friends. He saw Clement, desperately trying to get a reading from the void, his scientific certainty replaced by a terrible awe. He saw Bonnie, clutching Squishy, tears streaming down her face as she felt the land itself begin to die. He saw Alan, the man who believed in ultimate power, looking at a foe that had no substance to overcome. He saw Diantha, the champion, a queen who had just lost her kingdom. And he looked at Serena. Her face was pale, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes, fixed on his, were a blaze of defiance. She hadn't given up. As long as he was here, she would not give up. In that instant, a quiet, terrible clarity descended upon Ash. He had been forged into the Guardian, a shield of life. But a shield cannot close a wound. A shield can only stand before it. He knew what he had to do. There was no other path. He couldn't fight this enemy. He couldn't punch it. He couldn't have Pikachu use Thunderbolt on it. He had to talk to it. He pushed himself to his feet, Serena's hands the only thing keeping him steady. He looked into her eyes, and a lifetime of conversation passed between them in a single, silent moment. He saw her understand. He saw the terror dawn in her expression, immediately followed by a fierce, heartbreaking refusal. No, she breathed, her grip on his arms tightening like a vice. Ash, no. Don't even think it. There's no other way, he said softly, his voice full of a calm that terrified her more than any shout. It's an absence. The only way to fill it, is to go in. It will unmake you, she cried, her voice breaking. You'll be gone. Not if you're my anchor, he replied, placing his hand over hers. He looked at her, his expression more vulnerable and more certain than she had ever seen. Your song, it reached Xerneas in the heart of the storm. It reached me in the heart of the city. It's a tether. A lifeline. Sing for me, Serena. Sing me home. Tears streamed down her face, but she saw the absolute, unshakable resolve in his eyes. This was not a choice. It was a destiny. This was the final duty of the Guardian, and the final purpose of the heart. Her protest died in her throat, replaced by a terrible, solemn acceptance. Ash turned to the others. Clement, he called out, his voice ringing with authority. Patch her into every speaker, every broadcast, every pokenav in the world. I want the whole world to hear her. Clement, his face a mess of tears and sweat, could only nod, his fingers flying across his console. Ash walked to the edge of the platform beneath the sundial, to the very precipice of the spreading silence. He stood at the line where the vibrant stone met the encroaching gray. Pikachu leaped onto his shoulder, pressing against his cheek, a silent promise. Wherever you go, we go. Serena took her place atop the sundial's dais, the highest point in the ruined city center. She wiped the tears from her eyes, her sorrow forged into a will of iron. Ash was trusting her with his soul. She would not fail him. She took a deep breath, and she began to sing. It was not a song of joy, or memory, or even defiance. It was a song of existence itself. A simple, quiet, powerful melody that spoke of a boy from Pallet Town. Of a yellow mouse. Of a promise on a summer camp day. Of a dance in a ballroom. Of a vow under a setting sun. It was a song of connection, of bonds forged through adventure and hardship, of love that transcended distance and time. The song, amplified by Clement's technology, went out. It was a single, pure note of life in a dying world. And on that note, Ash Ketchum, the guardian of Kalos, stepped across the line. He took Serena's hand in his, and then stepped into the void. The sensation was not of falling or flying. It was of becoming undone. He was in an endless, featureless space, the domain of Malakbel. There was no up or down, no light or dark. There was only absence. He felt his physical form dissolving, his memories fraying at the edges. The names of his Pokémon, the faces of his friends, they began to fade like old photographs left in the sun. Pikachu, on his shoulder, let out a faint, fading cry. But then, he heard it. Serena's song. A single, golden thread in the infinite blackness. It was his anchor. His tether. He clung to it with his very essence, and the unraveling slowed. His form stabilized, no longer a body, but a single point of conscious, defiant aura. He was not alone. A presence, vast and ancient and utterly ambivalent, turned its attention to him. Malakbel. It did not have a form. It was the space itself. It communicated not in words, but in pure concepts, infused directly into his being. Inevitable. The void declared. It showed him the heat death of the universe, galaxies winking out one by one, stars growing cold, until only a final, perfect, uniform silence remained. It presented this not as a threat, but as a simple, logical truth. The ultimate state of all things. Peace. It offered, showing him the end of all striving, all pain, all desire. The end of a story is rest. This was the final battle. A philosophical debate with a god of nothingness at the end of time. And Ash knew he could not win by arguing. So he didn't. He answered not with logic, but with his truth. He let go. He opened his heart, his soul, and he projected everything he was into the void. He did not show Malakbel the joy of victory. He showed it the handshake with a rival after a bitter loss. He did not show it the beauty of a sunset. He showed it the feeling of sharing a simple loaf of bread with his friends, huddled around a campfire, exhausted and happy. He did not show it the power of his bond with Pikachu. He showed it the memory of a flock of Spearow, and a terrified boy shielding his new, stubborn friend with his own body, a choice made not from logic, but from a spark of connection. He projected his vow with Serena. Not the grand ceremony, but the quiet, desperate moment in the park when he realized he couldn't face the darkness alone. The need. The vulnerability. The imperfect, messy, terrifying and beautiful reality of love. He wasn't fighting the void. He was singing his own song back at it. A song of moments. Of choices. Of connections. A song of a life defined not by its inevitable end, but by the chaotic, brilliant, painful, and glorious noise made between the beginning and the finish. The song ends. Malakbel stated, a simple fact. But what a song it is, Ash projected back, a single, defiant note of pure, unadulterated life. He didn't try to defeat Malakbel. He didn't try to destroy it. He simply showed it. He held up his existence, his love, his bonds, and in the face of a god that saw only the end, he made it see the value of the journey. He satisfied its cosmic curiosity. He showed the silence the beauty of the song. And the silence listened. For a single, eternal moment, the two absolutes, the force of all that is, and the force of all that is not, found a point of balance. And in that balance, a boundary was re-established. A brilliant, blinding white light erupted from the black hole in the sky above Anistar. It was not an explosion. It was a sunrise. A dawn that banished the night. The light was warm, and it washed over the land, and where it touched, color and life and sound rushed back in. The desaturated city bloomed into vibrancy. The gray dust became stone and flower and life once more. The hole in the sky did not explode. It simply closed, sealing itself like a healed wound, leaving behind a clear, blue, morning sky. From the heart of the light, a single figure was expelled, falling. Ash. He was caught before he hit the ground, not by a Pokemon, but by a wave of gentle, psychic energy from Diantha's Gardevoir. He was laid gently on the ground at the foot of the sundial. Serena's song faltered, and she ran to him, falling to her knees at his side. He was unconscious, his body still glowing with a faint, residual light. She gathered him into her arms, burying her face in his chest, her tears of terror and relief flowing freely. He was breathing. He was warm. He was real. She had sung him home. Weeks later, the sky above Kalos was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The rebuilding had begun. The scars on the land were still there, grim reminders of the war they had fought, but new life was already beginning to sprout at their edges. The world's song had returned, and it was resilient. Ash and Serena stood on a hill overlooking Lumio City. The Prism Tower once again shone as a beacon of progress and hope. Ash was leaning on her slightly, still recovering his strength. He was quieter now, calmer. The manic, boundless energy of his youth had been tempered into a deep, steady strength. He had stood at the end of all things and returned. There was an oldness in his eyes, a cosmic understanding that he would carry forever. But when he looked at Serena, that ancient wisdom was replaced by a simple, profound, and very human love. "Is it, really over?" Serena asked, her voice soft. Ash looked at the horizon, his aura senses feeling the steady, healthy rhythm of the world. "The great silence is a part of the universe. Just like life is," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It won't be gone forever. But the balance is restored. We reminded it that both the song and the silence have their place." He turned to her, a small, gentle smile on his face. "But yeah. For us. For now. It's over." Their adventure had started as a journey for badges and crowns, a chase for the title of master and queen. It had become a war for the soul of the world. They had faced down cultists, monsters, and gods. They had been broken and reforged. Their marriage, once a desperate strategic decision, had become the foundation of their legend. It was not the end of their story, a happily ever after, in a storybook. It was the beginning. They were no longer just a trainer and a performer. They were the guardian and the heart of their generation, their bond a shield for the world, their story a new verse in the planet's eternal song. Serena leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun set over the city they had saved, together. The future was a vast, unknown region, full of new challenges and new adventures. But they would face it as they had faced the end of all things. Hand in hand. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.